from Radio City.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so the time is 9:02 a.m. I'm calling this meeting to order. Let's see, we're going to start off with a roll call, and I'm going to identify those persons present. We're all here. Sandy Bieber, Gene Lawson, Susan Wood, and Sturges Dodd, as well as the chair, Hoyte Decker. So what I would like to do now is to move directly into the item number 7.
Excuse me, Hoyte, you have approval of minutes.
Do I have to do that first?
You should.
Okay, all right. So we will approve the minutes. I'm looking for a motion and a second for 2 sets of minutes. The first held on for meetings held on April 3, 2019, and the second one most recently on May 1, 2019.
I move they both be accepted.
Okay, can I get a second, please?
Second.
Second, there you go. Thank you, Sandy. All right, and everybody say aye if you're in agreement, and otherwise say nay.
Aye.
Sounds good. All right, so now we will move on to item 7B2. Item 7B2, which is old business tree ordinance and discussion of member analysis of tree ordinance issues. And I would like to start with the proposal that was originally submitted by Julie Davis for section 253.36, 38, and that is for enforcement, and what is it, violations and enforcement?
Enforcement and remedies.
And remedies, okay. And so Sandy Bieber has stepped in to complete this little task, and so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Well, I took the substantial work which Julie had done and have provided that to the committee. And I have also provided my own personal comments on that work. I think that on 253-38, enforcement and remedies, the current provision is a single paragraph. It is what Julie has provided, I believe, is all derived from the 2014 Planning Commission proposal to revise the section. Section A deals with when an application is pending. It notes that the city can inspect a lot, and it also says that in addition, after a 24-month establishment period for tree planting and mitigation, the city will inspect the required plantings at least once a year. I want to be certain when provisions like that are put into an ordinance that the city is comfortable with doing that and taking on those kinds of continuing responsibilities. Because this doesn't say they're going to do it one time. It says at least one time a year, which to me suggests every year. And I can see after a while that would create an enormous burden on the city to be going around to every single property where there had been an application.
Sandy, could you reference the section? I'm lost. I can't.
253-38.
I'm sorry. Okay, got it.
A,
Okay.
right?
And we're on paragraph A.
Paragraph A. Okay, thank you.
So it says, while any application is pending for an action for which a permit is required under this article, and I would point out, by the way, under this article, if we start to restructure the tree code, we need to be careful about words like this article, this chapter, this section. This article means only Article 2 of the current tree code, which means only those aspects relating primarily to private property, private trees. So if we are going to change that, we should be careful about all these things. So it says that while an application is pending or while a request for approval of a tree survey, protection plan, et cetera, is pending, after the grant of the initial approval, that the city may inspect the lot. That's appropriate, see if there are any violations. I think that's fine. Then says, in addition, after a 24-month period, for the tree planting and the mitigation, the city will inspect the plantings at least one time a year. And I just want to be certain that we don't create extraordinary burdens. Now, I will say that that is the current provision in the current code. The current code has the same language. In addition, after a 24-month establishment period, that the city will inspect required plantings at least one time a year. Maybe we should find out whether the city's practice is to inspect it one time, not one time a year after the 24-month period. If that were the case, that to me would make a lot of sense, because plantings by 24 months have either taken or not taken. The initial maintenance has either occurred or not occurred. I think that way we would both be having teeth in the proposal, but not creating an unnecessary burden on the city. I will just continue by saying that the last sentence of that, maintenance shall include the replacement of all unhealthy and dead trees, etc., is also in the original provision. Then what is B is merely a continuation of the current section, which is not broken out into A and B. And B talks about violations, again, of this article.
Time out.
Yes.
Before you get down to that, unless you're going to refer back to A, were you going to refer back to A?
Well, I have, in subsection A, I think that there is this ambiguous requirement about one time a year. And that's my only comment on
Okay,
that.
well, I'd like to address
Go right ahead.
that, and if somebody else wants to make a comment about A.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Go ahead.
The main thing I was concerned about is that A refers to a permit application, but then with this continuing inspection business, is this intended to be the inspection follow-up to make sure that what was in the permit was done and that closes out the permit, or does the permit stay open forever?
Okay.
Well, the way the current provision reads, it says, while an application is pending or while a request for approval of a tree survey protection plan is pending or after the grant of such approval. So you are correct that it could be in any of those three circumstances.
Yeah.
But is there a time when it closes out? The permit application or whatever ends? Or do we keep inspecting it every year forever?
I don't know.
So, if I may, first of all, let me just clarify that as proposed by Julie Davis, there is no change to this 25338A, correct? Do I have that correct?
This is language is in the current provision. Yes.
Correct, yeah,
There is no A, but it's part of the original provision.
Oh, okay.
She took the original
Yeah,
provision
okay.
and made A and B.
Broke it out, yeah, right, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
All right.
and then added to it.
No substantive change in the text?
No.
Okay, thank you. So I agree totally with you, I think, and, you know, Liz Alingo will be here at 10:30, and I think it's an issue that we should raise with her. And I think, to Jean's point, I think it's also something that she should be questioned about as well. Let's see. Just generally, why are we doing this so long? I mean, 2 years for the thing to click in. I don't understand that. Maybe she can help flesh that out a little bit. But in the I think it's forgive me, the tree planting requirements provision. They talk about going back after 1 year, and there's an obligation, at least as suggested by Liz Lingo, that the property owner will have responsibility to replace any dead or dying, whatever, trees during that period of time. I think the same sort of language, or maybe even just a reference to the tree planting requirements might be a simpler way to approach this provision. I think it's just way too much here. You know, I want to be.
Okay, well, just for clarity, as Julie's presented A, B, and C, that is all from the current code,
Okay.
except for those provisions that are underlined in her
Okay.
draft.
Got it.
So that is principally in what she has characterized as B, which are violations of this article. The current provision says violations of this article or failure to maintain all required trees is reflected in the approved tree survey protection planting plan shall be grounds for an action by the city arborist and the Park and Shade Tree Commission, et cetera. It does not have this provision shall be subject to a non-compliance fee in the amount of 4 times the applicable tree removal permit fee, plus the applicable fee in lieu of mitigation if the property owner shall fail to obtain the approvals for mitigation. In addition, violations of this article or failure to maintain all trees required in the approved tree plan shall, and then it continues with the rest. With regard to B, I have a problem with subjecting a violator to a fee in the amount of 4 times the applicable tree removal permit for any violation of the article. I would like to see a fee schedule which assesses fees commensurate with the violation.
Right.
Perhaps the provision should state that at a fee schedule, that a fee schedule would be set from time to time and published by the Board of Commissioners. Second, if a property owner fails to obtain approval for a mitigation plan, the sanction should be to undertake the requirements of the mitigation plan and other punitive assessments if the property owner continues to not perform. A fee in lieu is established when mitigation on one's property or on city property is not practical. That's what the current provision says. It doesn't, so we have to be very careful when we're using these different terms. I had offered an alternative to this B. And if you all turn to, I'm sorry, the pages, I guess, didn't come out numbered when I did all this highlighting. But it would read as follows: violations of this article, including failure to maintain all required trees as reflected in approved tree planting plan or failure to obtain the requisite approvals for a tree removal mitigation plan, shall result in an assessment by the building inspector of a non-compliance fee. A schedule of non-compliance fees shall be established by the Board of Commissioners and shall reflect fees commensurate with the nature of various violations of this article. A violation of this article shall also be grounds for action by the city arborist, the Board of Adjustment, Park and Shade Tree Commission, or any other appropriate city official or entity for appropriate action, including but not limited to postponement of an action or denial of a pending action, revocation of any issued building or demolition permit or certificate of occupancy, revocation or any other permit for tree removal or land clearance, and specific performance or other equitable relief.
Comments?
I don't believe the Board of Adjustment has in its authorization the enforcement of anything. They just make decisions.
Right.
I don't think they go and enforce anything, whether
I have concern about their addition in there,
Yeah.
but
I'm happy
I'll
to
finish
take
with
it
the
out
comments
because
and
I
then
think the focal point of the tree code is the city arborist, building and licensing, and Park and Shade Tree Commission, as well as the commissioners, obviously. But if we take out the Board of Adjustment, we could say, or any other appropriate city official or entity.
that's fine.
I like that better, but I might want to go further. But again, did you have further comments, Jean?
No, I think that would
Okay.
be fine.
Ladies, any?
I also, the Board of Adjustment kind of struck my attention there
Okay.
and just thought that I couldn't see a role for them in this
Okay.
process.
Okay. So again, I think you're right on here, Sandy. I have some concerns about some of the, I'm nitpicking on some of the revisions you made, but I'm generally with it. Fee schedule, again, I think we need to bring that up with Liz and talk about that with her when she gets here. It's my understanding, and I'm gonna move on now to the issue of the role or the responsibility of the building inspector and also the Park and Shade Tree Commission in here. And again, I think we need to hear from Liz, but it's my understanding that, and this goes back to a meeting that I think Julie and I had with her some while back about the chain of command. And it's my understanding that she and the building inspector kind of, you know, he might have a higher, or he, whatever, might have a higher position in the hierarchy, but the city arborist does not report to the building inspector. The city arborist reports to the city manager. That's my understanding. Again, we can get her to clarify that. So the role of the building inspector in here is beyond me. I don't know why this, if I'm correct. I don't understand why that building inspector would have a responsibility in this provision. Similarly, again, my thought about tamping down the mechanism here, I mean, ultimately, an appeal would go to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission, but I think at this stage, we're talking about violations, we're talking about enforcement here. I think it's essentially the sole responsibility, and you can still have, you know, some other, your tiptoeing language in there about other responsible parties. But I think it should state that the city arborist is the one who's going to make that decision.
I think it's interesting because I think for some purposes, I still think the city arborist is under the office of the building inspector. I know when the building
I think you're
inspector
right.
gives a report to the city, he
Right.
includes any action by the
That's
city
correct.
arborist.
That's correct. And her position is in the department, or
Right.
whatever you call it,
Correct.
of the building inspector.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm agreeing with that, but as I understand it, again, we can ask her. I don't think it goes from the city arborist up to the building inspector, so.
Can I ask you a question
Well,
on,
by all means.
on, I'm on A, I know you guys skipped
Oh,
down,
she's
but
back in A, okay.
I'm a slow writer. Again, I'm coming in late to all this, so if I'm out of bounds, let me know here, but I was looking at A, and just for the sake of the fact that there's, again, I think one of our goals was to try and simplify the code a little bit. Is there any way we could kind of shorten what that says to just, at any point before, during, or after the permit process, the city may inspect a lot to determine compliance with this article? A required inspection will be performed and documented by the city after a 24-month establishment period. Does that shorten it in a way that says everything that says?
Well, the only thing that it leaves out maintenance, and it also leaves out an additional inspection.
I'd love to,
That 1 year, after a 24-month period, will inspect at least one time. It leaves at least one time a year. And that's the current language. Is that correct, Sandy?
The A that's there is the.
Yeah, that
current
is.
language. Yes.
And yeah, again, I think the question is whether that's a current practice and whether the, city wants that to be a current practice. But other
it just
than
seems
that-
a little confusing. I had to read that like 3 times to figure out that basically what it's saying is if you're applying before, during, or after a permit, the city may come out and do an inspection, but they're required to do one after the 24-month time. And then the maintenance part could be whatever it said.
So,
I just didn't know if we're into shortening these or if we're gonna kind of,
yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about. Our overall goal is to clarify and simplify.
Right.
And so your point's well taken. I just added a little line, so when Liz gets here, we can ask her, what her thoughts are on possibly simplifying this a little bit more.
did it miss anything on the first part by just saying at any point before, during, or after the permit process?
Well, it's both the permit process, but it's also when, in those cases where you have to submit a survey protection planting plan.
That would be part of the permitting as well. You have to do that for a permit, right?
I don't know if you always need to submit a plan. I think if you're just planting a tree,
You
it's
raised that.
part of my question, which is,
Yeah.
I just don't know when you need to do some of these things.
You raised that question.
If you're
with me.
just planting an additional tree, do you need to go to the city to get permission? I don't know.
No, but if it's not, I don't know.
We're gonna get to that issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You're gonna, so I'm the person responsible for tree planting requirements, and Sandy raised that as an issue
Right.
in comments to me. And so when we get to
These
that,
all,
we'll raise it.
these all mesh together.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right,
If we get
that's right.
resolution on that point, then that makes this
Yeah, yeah.
easier to draft.
Yeah. So, and taking a half step back and responding to your point, and it will help me to give you guys, I hope, some understanding about the flow of minutes. I know I'm digressing here a little bit, but nevertheless, what I have been doing, what I have done for the April and May meetings is after we've had our conversations, I've gone back and I've drafted revised, proposed documents. I just sent the one out for the May meeting to you the other day. And so I can take a whack at that. If you want to let me take a whack at it first, and you can give me your comments.
Yeah, sure.
Sandy?
Because I'll have to listen to the tape.
That's right.
Just to remind people, I previously told the committee, but I will be leaving at 10 o'clock sharp today in order to get to my niece's wedding at 1:30 in Washington, so.
All right, well, that's all I'll say on that, so you can go ahead, but thank you
But
for that
to
too.
that point, see here in the tree planting, not to digress, but the thing that always confused me is if you look at 25334, the current requirement, it says all trees shall be planted in compliance with the following. A, in accordance with the approved plan.
Yeah, you're right,
It says all trees.
yeah. You're right.
So I don't know.
Hoyte, could I make another suggestion?
By all
Because-
means.
Okay. I'm just wondering, since Sandy has taken kind of the lead on, I mean, he's kind of piggybacked on Julie's. And I'm just wondering, just in terms of kind of flow and, I mean, would it make sense for each of us to send comments to Sandy and let Sandy look at
Comments on
incorporate-
what?
on the content, rather than having them go to you and have you do it exclusively? I mean, I'm not cutting you out of the process. I'm just wondering if,
Go for it,
if
girl.
if it would make sense. to
Sturges,
have-
we originally started out
Uh-huh.
having sort of personal responsibility
Right,
with respect to code provisions, and in fact, that was the case. We just had to be very careful because we had been advised by the city
about
solicitor,
FOIA.
well, that we can't have sort of collective email consultations, but I mean, you could send me your comment,
Right,
Jean could
That's
send me
what I'm
his, Susan
saying.
could send me
that's
hers.
what, rather than group
Right.
emails, each one of us
Yeah.
individually send you our comment, but
Right.
not as a group email.
Yes, right.
And-
That's
and-
why we end up talking about this stuff so much in the meeting.
I know, it's very awkward.
Which we've complained about, but
Yeah.
been hammered down.
But I really like Susan's language, and I would love to have you be able to capture that without having
And that is great, as
depend
long as
on
we
your-
can then deal
And
with the tree planting section.
okay, I mean, but,
That's which is Hoyt's.
yeah,
Yeah.
and again, I would say if we could, each one of us, like, respond individually to the person that's taken
Yeah,
up that
it's
on,
good.
and let that, and then bring it back, because to me, that's the only way we're gonna get consensus.
So as a process matter,
what
who
do
is
you
going to take what we're deliberating today and create a revised
I'll take
provision.
all comments on 30
I mean,
days.
Sandy can take
Yeah.
everything
You
on
wanna do it?
his,
Yeah.
on that section.
Fine
and
by me.
Whatever else we get to,
It's fine by
whoever's
me.
the primary author will take all comments.
Okay.
What do you,
Cool.
what do you think?
Yeah.
Okay,
All right. Are we gonna backtrack and go back to all these other ones and do that too?
whatever we have time after we do this.
No, I don't,
mean-
we don't have to decide that today. I'm just talking,
Got it.
again, as a
I'm just
process
thinking
matter.
that going forward,
As a
I'm wondering
process
if
matter,
that would.
should everybody go back and look at what I have recreated and make their own thing, and then we can comment on that?
I think,
I'm good
I
with all
think
that.
as we have
Okay.
time and we take them on, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I
To
mean,
me.
basically, what I've done on every submission that any member of this committee has done is I have written my comments. Perhaps not as extensively as I did on Julie's, because she did
Right.
this and then
We haven't
unfortunately had
discussed
moved
it.
the committee. And Hoyte asked me to please take it up, and in addition to the ones I've been assigned to. But I mean, I have comments basically on everything that Hoyte's written, Susan's
Right.
written, and Jean's written.
Got it. I'm just thinking that that kind of lets us sort of do subcommittee work without being a subcommittee
Without
and
acting on it.
violating the
Right,
the
right.
FOIA,
Right.
if you see what I'm
Without
saying.
collective action. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right.
Good. Just call me Mr. 38.
There you go. He's
So
back.
are we ready for C?
Ready.
Okay, so C again is merely an extraction from the current code provision as Julie had set it out. And I just want to be careful here that I'm correcting it. Yes, she had not made any change to the language of C. She just had added a C as a new paragraph rather than all as one paragraph. My only comment on C was that in addition to what she had, that I thought it was appropriate for the city manager, and this exists in other provisions, that the city manager could extend a maintenance compliance period to allow for planting during the appropriate planting seasons of spring and fall. Because it doesn't make much sense if you tell somebody in November to do something in 30 days. It will die. And then you'll have a maintenance obligation and a further inspection obligation.
All right. Give me 1 second to take a look at that.
Do you know, Sandy, I'm just kind of curious, you were talking about having a separate sort of a fee schedule or fees attached to violations. Does the city maintain that kind of a document for other violations or for other things in the code? Is that?
I have no idea.
I
Zoning
don't
code,
either.
maybe?
I don't either. I mean, I think it's a good idea.
Zoning
And-
code?
And yeah, for the
Well,
zoning code.
yeah, because
or
some of
other-
this stuff, and I forget elsewhere, I made a comment on something else, maybe in the next section, but you know, where if you say that a contractor, if they do a certain thing, they lose their license for 2 years. I mean,
That's
yeah, if it's a draconian, maleficent, intentional, grossly negligent act, maybe. But what if it was just somebody?
Yeah, I hear you.
You know.
Or for me, it's repeated offense. I mean, to me,
Yeah,
a certain
exactly,
number
yeah.
of offenses.
And so I'd rather, and maybe will be the impetus for the city to consider this not only in the context in which we're discussing, but in other situations. I mean, but I think that it should be something that can be dynamic. In other words, which is the reason why I don't want to make it part of the code, but I want it to be something that the city can do by resolution, or if the city decides the commissioners decide at some point to give that authorization to one of their commissions so that it can easily experience and so on, and you can change it easily rather than going through this extraordinarily, I mean, I don't understand, you were there, Sturges, I wasn't. I don't understand why in 2014, when this extraordinary document was presented by the Planning Commission, that nothing was done with the tree code. It was, I mean, we don't have to discuss this now, I'm just
Right.
speaking from my own. I thought there was so much there. They had looked at the code, they had marked up the code, they had written a commentary on what they were doing and trying to achieve. There was resource material. And now you're telling me there's a 2016 code, which I never even saw.
And my understanding, again, without going into a lot of detail, is the reason that that came about or was generated was because the 2014 version was not adopted by the mayor and commissioners at the time, and
Yeah.
they thought maybe if we go back and revisit it, and again, I don't know all the conversations, we'll be able to generate something that's more palatable. And then my understanding is that's when the city arborist was brought in, who she's fairly new to the city.
Well, and then the problem with all that is that apparently all this process takes an extraordinary amount of time to become a part of the city code. But if you have a posted schedule that's done by resolution or done by a
It's
commission,
like a list of
it's gonna work-
trees, it's that
work a
kind of.
lot, exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay. So we good on 38?
so we'll be sending you
Yep.
comments. Sandy.
Great.
All right.
Where do you want to go
39?
now? Oh, 39. So 39, 253-39, Julie made, proposed relatively few changes. In the third sentence, any tree removed without proper permit will be subject to a fine. She inserted $1,000. It currently provides not less than $250 or nor more than $500. The second change was that it said if this fine is not paid within 7 days, the fine will, and it used to be not less than $500 nor more than $1,000. And she changed it to read that the fine will be $1,000 per day. And then the final sentence said if said tree is removed by a licensed construction contractor or tree care professional, the contractor or tree care professional shall forfeit its business license to work within the city for a period of 2 years. Oh yeah, so here's that provision. So I looked at this, and Julie, by the way, had 2 footnote commentaries to this, which are also included at the bottom of the page, where she said that a review of the tree ordinance reviewed by the Planning Commission and shows that $1,000 is a common fine for removing protected trees without a permit. I would note that we need to be careful again with terminology. Here she is referring to removing protected trees.
Yeah.
And the current provision talks about any tree, not a protected tree. Any tree is a lot different than just a protected tree. We ought to focus on perhaps what is the right categories here. And then since many of these ordinances, including those discussed by the ISA guidelines, treat tree removal without a permit as a misdemeanor, punishable by fine, imprisonment up to 6 months or both. I will defer to Jean on discussing criminal sanctions for violations of the tree code. Her second comment is that the fines are basically viewed as a cost of doing business by contractors, and that a more effective strategy for protecting trees on private property is revoking for a significant period of time a business contractor's license. And again, my comments, which are at the end of this document, is I wasn't really sure how this section works with the prior section. We ought to be very careful when we're talking about, one section is called, violations and penalties, and the section before that was called enforcement and remedies. I would think that violations and penalties and enforcement is sort of all the same thing. But this requires fines for unauthorized tree removal, which subjects contractors to losing their business license for 2 years. I think there's merit in subjecting contractors as well as the property owner to sanctions for violations of the article generally. We might even talk about the chapter, which would be the whole tree code, and in particular the unauthorized removal of a tree. But loss of business license for 2 years is very harsh, and I think we need to agree on a notion of a fine or a fee schedule or a sanction schedule. It may be that if it is a very inexcusable act and a continuing act, that maybe at some point it does go into becoming a misdemeanor and has sanctions beyond fines available, but I just worry about the draconian nature of this right now, especially as applied to contractors. And even property owners. It would seem to me that if a property owner has some objection to the allegation that they improperly removed a tree without a permit, they're going to be paying, under this proposal, $1,000 a day until they have the right to seek some review and recourse for that. That's a lot of money. I mean, we just need to be thoughtful about these things.
Who makes the decision? I didn't see anything in here that.
No one makes the decision.
It says.
I'm sure it's the
Who's
building
responsible?
inspector, but it doesn't say that.
I would hope not the building inspector, but
Yeah, again, I've raised the same concern. I think it's outside the scope of the building inspector's position.
well, there's also no due process. I mean,
There you go.
for a person losing his license
There you
without some sort of
Yeah.
warning, process, appeal rights or whatever.
Well, so I guess I'll jump in first this time. My thought is, what are we doing, again, we discussed this earlier, what are we doing in other, like the zoning, what are we doing in other code provisions about enforcement? What's the tact that we take? Maybe we should look at some of these other enforcement provisions in the other parts of the code to get some idea about how to proceed here.
They're under attack right now.
Yeah,
also.
no, I know there are. I know there are. And there's probably even due process. I think this one needs a major overhaul, frankly. I think it's.
At least in the context of the zoning code, the building inspector does have the authority to go put a stop work order,
Uh-huh,
which then provides for the due process that doesn't exist here.
right.
One of the things, when I'm looking at this, again, I would think that fines should be in some kind of a schedule and not listed in here. I
Why
mean,
not?
again, if we're gonna be
Why not?
consistent with that, because, $1,000 today, in 10 or 20 years it doesn't mean the same. The other piece is, for me, that it talks about any person, firm, well, I'm gonna make a comment about corporations or businesses getting their business license and it removed. And my thought is that I would think there's a greater burden on a business to know how they're supposed to operate within the city possibly than a citizen.
They're certainly on notice.
And, they should know what the rules are of the city above and beyond, I think, a citizen. Maybe that's an incorrect assumption, but I'm just
I don't
thinking.
think it is.
But again, I think some kind of a staggered, what can I say, incrementally, strict response makes sense for anybody. The other piece here, and this is what I identified in my document that I kind of said.
Excuse me, I
Yes,
just wanted, on the
sure.
one question, Sturges.
Sure.
So you were recommending that a schedule of fines be outside of the code provision, right?
I agree with you
Yeah.
that it should in
And
this.
what about the 2-year suspension of a
Oh, the
license?
2-year suspension, I mean, I'd really have to look at that, and I think Hoyte has a good idea to look at, see how does this match other code violation responses in the city code, other business people who violate building codes or other kinds of codes. Is this in line with that? I think that's a good question to ask. I guess another issue for me that doesn't make any sense is that we say here, any person, firm, or corporation violating any provision of this article shall be punished. Shall be punished as described herein, and in addition thereto be enjoined from continuing. Then it goes on to say each tree cut, damaged, or poisoned shall constitute a separate offense. Then it says any tree removed. So if you'll notice in here, there is no fine for a tree cut, damaged, or poisoned. Only for a tree removed, even though those are all violations
Sure.
of the article.
Sure.
which this suggests should receive a penalty, but the penalty is not assessed.
Right, good eye. That's
So, you know, and any of those things could lead to a tree dying and essentially being removed, but it might not. It might just slowly harm them, but it's still a violation. So my feeling is there should be penalties for violation, because it says right here there are, and it makes sense. If we make it a law, there should be a response that enjoins or punishes folks that do all that other stuff, not limited to tree removal.
Anybody else have a further thought? Because I do. I'm sorry, I just see this action, potential action against businesses as the city shooting itself in the foot. Because what's going to happen here is you send these guys away for 2 years, forget it, I'm out of here. You know, there's plenty of work in Sussex County, I don't need this city. They're already saying that now. They don't want to come into the city, that, you know, like builders, we've heard this in testimony before us. It's easier out in the county. Why do I need to come here? So these guys are going to leave, and we're probably setting ourselves up to leave some potentially high-quality tree service companies.
Can I give you a real life scenario just for a minute? I know you're in a hurry, but I'm gonna.
No, that's good, that's good, we're good.
First, let me preface this by saying I do not live in downtown Rehoboth. Okay, I do live in Rehoboth Beach, but I don't live in downtown Rehoboth. 4 days ago, we had one of our tree limbs come down, smacked on the railing.
Storm.
You know, I had gotten a tree company out there last year. They gave me a proposal to remove some trees, and I didn't do it right away because it was a ton of money. So anyway, long story short, yesterday, the tree company came out, and he looked. He said, I told you to take that down last year. I said, I know, but I didn't. So he's taking 4 trees down. Okay, he's going to come out on Monday, take them down before the rest of them come down. While we were there, the neighbor came over and said, hey, you know, we were walking around the property, and she said, hey, you know, Sue, while you're doing that, any chance you can cut all the limbs here that are overhanging my roof, because it looks like it's going to come down.
Your trees.
My trees overhanging neighbor's roof.
Got it.
So the tree man said, he said, yeah, he says, I'll just add it to the proposal. You know, not a problem. He says, you know, I recommend this. That one I wouldn't touch because that's going to do this. That one, he said, that one you might as well just take the whole tree down because it's completely dead. He says, doesn't make me sense chopping this. He said, that's a black gum right there that's dropping balls all over there. He said, that's just worthless. It's smothering out the one next to it. Long story short, I just got the email, another $1,500. My neighbor's taken care of. I'm taken care of. Trees are taken care of. Railing's not going to be broken. House isn't going to be wrecked. What would have happened if I lived in Rehoboth?
Exactly.
You'd have had to file for a permit.
Exactly.
That is what my problem is with everything that we're doing here, okay? Literally, that is what everything that I'm listening to you guys say with these penalties and the time wait and the inspections and all that, okay? Now, I do have a lot of trees, so, and I understand the need to protect the trees that we have, but you cannot government overregulate so much that common sense is just gone to the wayside. I mean, here's a professional. I'm not stupid. I got 3 proposals last year. 3 tree experts came out and told me the exact same thing. That one's dead. That one's dead. Those 2 will be dead within 3 years. You got to pay for a crane to come out. You might as well take them down now.
These are all private trees on private
Private
property?
trees on my private property. What would have happened if I lived in Rehoboth? 2 of them aren't dead yet, okay? But I got 3 guys telling me, look, you're paying for a crane to come out here. They're dead because the roots were disturbed during a construction of a swimming pool. They're gonna die, all right? And it's 15 feet away from the pool, but it's just the way the trees grew.
Yep.
So, all of that being said, 3 proposals, 3 professionals, 3 people that sat here, unbeknownst to me being on this committee, you know, they all pretty much said the same thing. We're within $500 difference on a job that's involving, at this point, 9 trees, okay? They're taking down 4 to save 2 more because they think they can. They're saving my neighbor's house. They're keeping, so everything that we're doing here, you guys understand that you can't even plant a tree in your yard. So I get we're trying to go through each one of these sections here and nitpick all this, but I think, again, the whole system is, I am just saying that we need to think about the
And
big
Susan,
picture.
you are totally describing the experience of people who live in town. And I'm going to let Sturges talk about all the policy implications of this, but I will tell you that not only would you have to apply for a permit to remove the trees, but that grant of the removal, if it is granted, would be subject to any aggrieved person, which means anybody who thinks they are aggrieved, not just the property owner,
Right.
being able to take that on appeal to the Park and Shade Tree Commission.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to get at. It's really not my neighbor's business if I have a tree that's gonna fall down on my house that needs to be addressed right away. It's not our business, it's not the city's business. It's a matter of public safety, and this is what's happening, you know? And you can't make somebody go through 6 months and $1,000. I mean, what if the one tree that he said, you know what, it really is questionable, but Susan, it's $1,000 for the crane to come out. And it's probably gonna die within a year, okay? What if he was wrong and that maybe that one tree wouldn't have died, but he was just being safe? You're gonna charge him $1,000 a day?
Well, I mean,
Okay.
but obviously, you know,
And you're gonna let one person that we defined in the last meeting that I was here before the one I missed, as potentially someone who doesn't even have to be licensed as an arborist, but they have to work in the business for 2 years? Tell 3 people that have been doing this for their entire life? This is where you have to be very careful how much power you give people and how much penalty you give people and how much overregulation that you give people. Okay, we're not dealing with nuclear weapons here, we're dealing with trees. Okay?
Well
So
said. Well
that's
said.
all I have to say,
And
because I know
so,
Sandy has
if
to
we
leave.
take a step
Okay.
back, I'm gonna say,
I'm with you.
I'm gonna say there is no reason why we can't have the, as it's described, the canopy goal, which would be set out in this, whatever they're calling it now, tree plan, strategy, whatever. They're not, you know, they're going in the same direction. We can achieve that and still have our canopy goals met.
Get back to the basics. This is what we are trying to
Right,
protect. We're
right.
trying to keep Rehoboth green.
Yeah.
Okay? We're not trying to make your life miserable. We're not trying to overregulate you. We're not trying to tell you what color flowers should be in your front yard. We're trying to keep Rehoboth green.
You're here.
And this is how we need to get there. I know I'm oversimplifying something you've worked on forever,
No,
but
no,
that
no.
is why
We're-
this
no.
has been drafted
We're getting there.
12 times since 2000.
this, I'm gonna, may I?
Yes,
Or-
please.
Okay, thank you.
I don't
thank
take
you.
offense
I
to
got it.
anything.
Not at
I'm
all,
just-
not at all. I think this is the real challenge, and at Monday's Mayor and Commissioners Workshop meeting, the Mayor and Commissioners talked about their visions
Oh, right.
for the town,
Right.
and one of the things, so they were kind of listing all the things that they wanted to see Rehoboth be, or to preserve, or whatever, and one of the things I was struck by were so many of the contradictions. I got up and spoke very briefly, and I plan to follow it up with a letter, but I think there's so many contradictions in what people, kind of want. They want stormwater to that system to work. They would like to see a reduction, some of them in mini hotels. They want, one of them, more parking places on private property. To retain the charm, nostalgia, cottagey, kitschy flavor, to preserve and perpetuate the tree canopy, on and on. But what I'm saying is just a real conflict. And what I got up and said, right now, what we have, we have a tree code and we have a building code, and they fight one another. They absolutely do, because, there's a goal to preserve and perpetuate the unique wooded seaside character of the town. And the problem is there's no consensus as to what that is, what constitutes that. Because you're talking about green. I mean, green could just be, we have lawns and we have shrubs, which is a whole different thing from we have canopies, a canopy. And the truth is that most of the canopy of the town, with the exclusion of the parks, is on private property. And the only room there is currently for canopy trees is on private property. It's not street trees. I mean, people would love to have the streets lined with wonderful trees. There's not enough room to plant them in the strips along the streets. So this is where the conflict is. How do you actually preserve and perpetuate a canopy and yet protect private property rights? I think that's the real conflict here. And I don't think there's a consensus about that. So I hear what you're saying about overregulation. There's some things that kind of don't make sense. And one of the things, I know you all have talked to Liz, I've been talking to Liz for years, and sometimes she'll just kind of say, well, why don't we just at least have one or two substantial trees on each lot? Would that work? In the 2014 revision by the Planning Commission of the code, they put things in the code, but they also had, and I hope you all have seen it, a list of recommendations for the city, which they didn't feel comfortable trying to put in code. And one of those, and very controversial ones, was, does the city need to consider having houses be smaller so there's more room for trees if, as is stated, having trees in the town of a significant stature is a goal of the city. So I don't argue with you about some of the regulation. I mean, a lot of it doesn't make sense. And Liz has said things like, there's nothing in here that lets someone re-landscape. You know what I'm saying? I mean, take out trees without penalty that are less valuable to replace them with ones that are more. To me, that's the kind of thing that makes sense. But the real struggle is, how do you keep significant canopy trees in the town, given the size of
I mean, if
lots?
everybody had 2 big canopy trees on their property, is that enough?
It may be all that we can do, and it could be.
Right.
But it goes against kind of this whole DB, one of my problems with the code, and with talking with Liz, that I kind of struggle with, and even Googling everything I can, is this whole, replacement of a tree by caliper inches.
Makes no sense.
See, and I think I know what it's about, but I kind of don't. And it might not be consistent with really what the city wants. You know what I'm saying?
Well, consistent with what you're saying is, if at the end of the day,
Right.
you are looking for a city with tree canopy,
Right.
then if you're removing a tree that could be old and could have, I don't know, say 24 inches, so we're staying within the depth, 24 inches of caliper. If instead of saying that means that you have to plant 8 new trees, which is the current provision,
Right.
you said you need to plant a tree of similar species that at maturity or at 10 years or whatever number you want, will have similar height, similar
Yeah.
characteristics.
I mean,
That to me makes a whole lot more sense.
especially given the size of lots we have.
Yeah.
And you have to water it,
Yeah.
and you have to take care of it,
Yeah.
and you can't cut it down without letting us know. And we don't
I-
care what you do with the rest of your lot, make it beautiful,
Mhm.
That, to me,
Yeah.
would eliminate so much of this
Yeah,
craziness.
and I think that's why, one of the things I haven't gotten to do, because I'm kind of new to the game here, but I've got all of Julie's, files, and some of the things she has that I haven't.
You mean the
had a
tree
chance-
ordinance stuff?
Yeah, she kind of just said, here,
Oh.
pass the torch, here, have my stuff. Thank you, Julie. Part of what she has in there are some tree codes from other cities.
Yeah.
And I haven't gotten a chance to really look in there and just see if we might not want to look at doing something
We've
completely
discussed that sort of.
different. Yeah, and I may, you know, and something simpler and something that really gets down to
That's
this.
what I think you should do. I
core
think you
stuff.
should just start
And-
with a very basic, simple, this is what we want to keep.
And I think Liz is a great resource because Liz can say, yeah, that's doable. Or, yeah, the city can enforce that, or it can't, you know? That's kind of my sort of short to long range vision.
I mean, we even have an article to tell the city what to do with their own trees. You know what I mean? I mean, that's a whole section of what, obviously the city's not gonna cut down their trees if they, you know, I mean, it just seems to me this is huge amount of words to say, you know, I mean, people aren't going to intentionally make their yard look terrible, okay?
They're not.
They are gonna cover every inch of it with house if they can. So make the inches that they can cover smaller if you're trying to, you know, then, but just to tell people they can't have a pool because they have a tree that's been there, but they have 30 other ones. You guys, it's going to come back and bite you. It's gonna come back and bite the city, probably long after we're
Already
gone.
Well,
It's gonna come
already
back.
biting
You
the
know.
city, but
Yeah, but I'll just mention Sturgis
Shoot.
because I learned through research with the Delaware Tree Service, which is a state agency,
right.
that in fact there are two other cities in the state of Delaware that have tree codes, Wilmington and Newark.
I've looked at those.
And have you? Because
have.
I also heard that that sort of group consults among each other, including with Liz. And this hadn't been brought to our attention.
The communities have had conversations
Well,
with.
that's what I was told by the
What-
person
yeah.
at the tree service. I don't know. if
My
it's so.
recollection is one of those is only about public trees.
Oh, okay.
One of those two cities. The other one may have some private tree stuff.
I mean, we
But-
may be way, way, way ahead of them, and maybe
We're,
that's
we're,
not
I
good
think
either.
we're way, way
Yeah.
ahead of them in
Yeah.
terms of private
Both of them.
tree. Yeah. But that is kind of interesting. But I really do want to get a chance to go back and kind of look at some of these that are a little simpler and just see if we can, because I feel like if we don't approach this from a goal that we can get consensus on, we're kind of just
Start it with the goals.
exactly.
Again, I said this
Start with
2
the
months
goal.
ago, you're going backwards.
Yeah.
Just start with,
If we start
this is
with the
where
goal
we
and
want
see-
to end up.
Yeah,
What problems could we get into getting to there?
yeah.
You know, what's somebody gonna come in and say, I only have 2 trees and I wanna take down one of them? Well, no, you can't,
Yeah.
you know? So where do you wanna end up?
Yeah. I mean,
Now,
but
we're
I
trying to
think
rewrite
Going
something.
back to the, kind of the preamble, you know, the thing that says, this is what we observe, this is this is what we want to do, and see if we can,
You talking about the planning commission report?
there is a similar preamble in all versions of the code.
Well, the
Where
code
it
itself.
talks about the findings and purpose. So, I mean, I just think it makes sense, you know, everything that's in the code should make sense with regard to that basic. And we might need to revisit the purpose, if it doesn't fit. Just a thought.
I look forward to watching you all on the video.
Are you really?
I need to get.
Have fun at the wedding.
Yeah, do.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to propose, now that he's gone, I'm going to propose that we take.
I was gonna say, you're gonna sign me how many more things?
Yeah, that's right. Take a break on trees,
Okay.
and what I'd like to do in order is to go back and pick up some of these other elements of our meeting agenda. And then, if we can do that before 10:30, I'll cut you loose on your tree
Okay.
issue.
Sure.
Can I say something?
Oh, I'm sorry, forgive me.
The meeting the other day when the commissioners were giving their spiels about what they wanted to happen to Rehoboth, maybe one of the things we need to do is what a couple of them did, which was, their preamble was, we want to make Rehoboth a helpful, positive welcoming, flexible place. Now, if we look at the ordinance from the tree perspective of being as onerous as we can about governing trees, that doesn't necessarily comport with the administration being a helpful, positive, welcoming place. One of the things I used to be on the warpath about with Greg Priest when he was city manager was, this was the no city. No matter what you did when you came up to the front door, it was no.
Absolutely.
And what I don't necessarily want is everything that somebody wants when they come up to say yes, but at least say maybe.
Right.
Or let's explore this and see what we can do. Let the city
And
people,
you have that now with this new city manager.
we have more of it.
Okay, you do. You actually, I mean, I'm in 26 years in business, I will tell you that you have someone that actually is listening and making sense, I think, in our city manager and our mayor, which we did not have before.
Right,
So,
but there's other people that have power that are not those people. And you have to be kind of careful about that.
And I think, Gene, you know, you're right, it's about striking a balance between regulation and kind of preserving, you know, kind of the friendly, welcoming, the things that make the town attractive and compelling and successful and all that, you know, it's that balance. Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you. All right, so if I may, correspondence. No correspondence.
Okay.
Okay, organization. Oh, yeah. So this actually goes back some time ago. It literally goes back to whatever, 2017, and it was like January or February. There was a training session put on by the city attorney to describe to committee and board of commissioners members the ins and outs of FOIA. So I raised the question about, in that meeting, I raised the question about the concept of conducting meetings when all the members weren't there, but having them participate. I didn't get an answer at the time. Subsequently, more recently, in the last couple months, the issue came up again, and I actually sent an email to the city attorney. And in response to my request, Glenn Mendel said the following. Bottom line is that given current state of communication technologies, participation by teleconferencing or video conferencing is prohibited for a meeting of the city commissioners. And while video conferencing is permitted under limited circumstances for appointed committee members, teleconferencing is prohibited because it unduly limits the public's ability to observe the committee members' participation. Okay. All right. Next item. Administration of minutes. So for the last 2 minutes, the 2 sets of minutes you just approved, and by the way, I have signed these. And thank you very much. So anyway, we've gotten some comments about the content, the depth of content on these things, and but I'm happy to see that we passed these things without any concerns, or at least not expressed. So. As a consequence of those comments, I actually sat down and met with the city secretary, Ann Womack, last week. And she said essentially that there's 3 different possible sets of minutes that you can create. Action minutes, minutes with details, and transcripts. Transcripts are verbatim, essentially a recording that has been reduced to writing. And what she said, what's important is what is decided more than what is discussed. And so we kind of fall, I mean, as a practical matter, we're not even reaching the point of having action minutes because we're not making any decisions. There's no vote taken. You know, we're not even reaching consensus at this point. We will, you know, but nevertheless, we do need to have a record of what we're discussing. And so my efforts are towards getting maybe some detail. Okay, I think we've said some interesting things today that I'm going to capture in the minutes for this meeting. But beyond that,
Could I make a comment?
yes, you may. But
Sure, go ahead.
but actually, let me finish.
Okay.
And then I'd like to offer her an opportunity to make a comment. So anyway, as to note taking, she suggested that, and apparently it's not uncommon here in the city, that the person who is chairing the meeting has responsibilities that make it difficult or impede the process of note taking. Okay, and that's kind of what's happening to me. You know, I got busted the other day because I didn't have my my March meeting minutes, and so I'm going to be taking care of that. But the point is, and I've put this on the table before, I'm putting it on the table this morning. I would be interested if somebody, and it doesn't have to be a single person. I think it's more appropriate that we share. I'm willing to talk about it, but sharing the responsibility for note-taking and preparation of minutes. Okay? So that's my 2 cents. Does the city secretary wish to say anything? No. Okay. Your turn.
Okay, well, I sort of anticipated that you would bring up this. And my thought is it does make sense if people are willing to kind of rotate the responsibility. I'd prefer that than to having one person be the secretary, because essentially that kind of puts that person on the bench also.
In the same way.
In the
It's just
same
one
way.
step down.
Yeah,
I agree.
it kind of
I agree.
permanently puts them on the bench.
I agree.
I mean, I'd be willing to do today's if you want me to.
I got that one
I always
covered.
take notes.
I got that one
I
covered.
just, if you want.
Today's
okay.
good.
That's cool.
And in fact,
Yeah.
as long as we're doing this process,
Right.
that is studying the provisions,
Got it.
I'll take responsibility for those minutes. But when we get down the road
Okay.
to maybe getting into some other agenda items, new business or however you want to characterize it,
Okay.
then I would be helped to have
Just-
assistance in that way.
I mean, I'm just offering and just saying, I think
I appreciate it.
any one of us
I
could
appreciate
probably
it.
do some
Yeah.
version that should
Right.
satisfy some
Right.
minimum requirements. I'm maybe don't want to talk out of turn and speak for others, but the one other thing, Gene, if I could just, I think we did have an action item today, because I don't think an action item has to be something we voted on necessarily
Okay.
and reach consensus, but I mean, we did say, and this would be helpful to me, because when I'm looking at what are we doing next month, it's really helpful for me if I have a copy of the minutes sooner rather than later that tell me this is what we said we do and this is what's expected at the next meeting. And I mean,
Okay.
one that we said is I think we all agreed that we're gonna send Sandy our comments on the 253, 38, and 39 that he discussed today. So, I mean, it would be great, just for me, as a reminder, to
Right.
have that.
So to
In the
that
minutes.
point,
Yes,
I mean, I consider that a significant turn in the process that we've undertaken.
okay,
And I intend to send out a memo
okay,
that kind of
Okay.
Summarizes what we said and give you my thinking about how that should proceed. Okay, I mean, I'm already sitting here thinking about that. So I will send a memo to the committee
Okay.
addressing that. And, you know, then I will welcome comments, and then we, at that point, we will then move forward and dump everything on Sandy. Okay.
Okay, just for that. I mean,
That's
everything
right.
else would be dumped.
Okay. Yeah. I'm all in on that one.
With respect to the minutes,
Yes.
I think we're in a new era as far as that's concerned, because we now have the ability to have the video and audio stuff. In the past, minutes have been typically used in legal situations where you need to find out what the reasoning behind an action by a board or
A decision.
or whatever. And probably within the past 4 or 5 years, that is still the case, but if there is a videotape archive of a meeting or whatever, and a court reporter could take that and come up with a transcript, the transcript will trump any minutes you've got. And what I'm wondering is why we need to do anything other than adopt the video and audio version.
Oh, I like that. That sounds like another email to Mr. Mandelis.
And says no.
Uh-oh.
You'll need minutes.
You still need minutes, even if it's 2 sentences long?
However you wanna do it,
Yeah.
still need
I'm
minutes.
liking the
So, but
concept.
my question would be, seriously, on up to this point in this meeting, basically the minutes would be, we called a roll, we had a first, we had a second.
Yeah.
We discussed the tree ordinance.
Yeah.
I mean, do we
That's
need
right.
to get more specific than that, since we've come up to zero,
Depending
nothing
on your
concluded?
committee.
The
The reason why, one of the reasons why you need to have minutes is because we have a video policy that we keep the videos for a year
Oh.
on the portal, and after that, a year on the servers, and then they're destroyed, so you need minutes.
That answers that.
And it needs to have the reasoning behind, what Mr. Langford was saying, we need to have the reasoning behind all the.
I understand that. What I'm trying to figure out is, and maybe it's something we gotta take up with the commission, is if they've got this, that it could be either put on a thumb drive or disk or whatever, why do we have to get rid of them after a year? Why do we have to get rid of them after 10 years?
That's why God made the iCloud.
We keep them forever. I've got minutes from the planning commission and the city commission in my office that go back 20 years, 25 years. And I looked through them, and I was at most of those meetings, and you know, from the minutes, you can't figure out what God's creation these people were doing.
One of the things, I've been on a lot of committees, and what I've noticed is just in terms of the work, you know, going forward and people kind of being supported in doing what they said they were gonna do, or it's kind of, if there isn't some kind of record, stuff just gets
Written.
lost. I
Written
mean,
record.
people just forget what happened a month ago, and they, you know, there's no record that says. I know on Monday, Jay Legrish stood up and said, you know, I was in the military. We had something called action minutes, and you know, it said this is, you know, this is what we say we're going to do. It was either, you know, by such and such a time, by such and such a person. It was either done or it wasn't done. And then you've got a record of accomplishment.
And you got accountability.
You got accountability, record of accomplishment. I just find that it's a tool.
Yeah.
It's, you know, regardless of the legality or anything, I just find it as a very helpful tool. So
All right.
that's
All
my
right.
vote.
Are we ready to move on?
Sure.
Citizen comment. Zip.
What did we just
We're
decide?
overwhelmed with
We
this.
didn't,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
everybody listened very nicely.
What did we just decide?
We're gonna have minutes, and Hoyte is going to do them.
For this meeting,
this
and then
For
we're
the
rotating after that?
foreseeable future, and then
Yeah, but
at some
I'm
point-
inviting you, I'm gonna just make a suggestion, if you would like to hear it. You're gonna send a memo. Your minutes, your memo could be in the minutes, and then you'd only have
Yeah.
one document.
yeah, no.
And we also.
I don't work that way.
Okay, I'm just saying. And the other thing is, I kind of feel like it's onerous on you to take the minutes on yourself.
But for the next couple months, as we continue along this process,
Okay,
the minutes are gonna wind up looking like they did today, okay?
okay.
I've got detail
Yeah,
on the issues beyond the actual review of tree ordinance issues, okay?
got it.
So that part of the minutes is not a problem, okay? And in fact, let's go on to the very next issue, which is this administrative variance. It's the first item of old business, 7A. I'm not gonna go into the complete history of this thing, but I'm just gonna work on a couple updated items. First, there was a meeting some time ago, don't press me on when, I don't remember. And it involved several commissioners, mainly Commissioner Schlosser, the city manager, and there was a discussion of how we might treat administrative variance issues. And at that point in time, they allowed me to bring up my old chestnut about unwritten practices. And there seemed to be general interest in pursuing that avenue, which was good because it allowed me then, I mean, I've been saying this since this committee has been formed, that the city needs to address these policies that are carried out without ever being documented or formalized, or however you want to describe it. And so I drafted a document. I believe I sent it out to you guys, and I sent it to the people that were in that meeting. The issue then came up at a commissioners meeting, and somehow it kind of got sidetracked, and they were back on the concept of pursuing it as a code provision, or an exception to a code provision, or an administrative variance concept. And Jean was present at the request of Commissioner Schlosser, so I want to just give you a chance, Jean, if you have any comments to add about.
Well, I made some comments to the commissioners also, that what we were looking at here started out being an administrative variance as an individual thing that somebody applies for and gets the waiver from in the case of the county, from the county zoning commission, commissioner or whatever. But I also raised the issue that what we could do is establish a method of doing, each time an ordinance is passed, having a rulemaking essentially, like a government agency does, of just explaining a few things about how it's gonna work, so that when time comes for it to happen, we don't have to start all over from scratch. We could do both those, or a combination of both of those, but to my knowledge, the commission hasn't done anything since then.
They haven't. And to your point, though, and I think this is an important element that I saw because of my rulemaking background, and that is you have an opportunity for public input. You have a comment period, 30, 60 days, whatever, and you allow the public to provide their, the basis. Some of these things, the contractor's gonna want to get involved. He's probably got some very good things to say about how
That's
this might play
If a new
out.
ordinance is being considered, is that what you're?
I'm sorry?
If a new ordinance is being considered
No,
for
this was-
adoption?
No,
In my
it's-
situation, would be after the ordinance has been passed,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, after
Yeah.
it's been adopted.
how to implement it.
Got it.
Right.
So it's sort of policies and procedures, is that another way of saying
Okay.
rulemaking?
Sort of adopting the background into the ordinance itself.
Right.
Okay.
So the ordinance can remain
Supplement.
succinct.
Okay.
Ah.
All right.
Gee, if I could just, because my brain
ahead.
hasn't closed the loop, is that a conversation that that we're having with the city about something they might consider adopting
So,
as a
yeah.
process?
The Commissioner Schlosser came to me because
Right.
she saw our committee as being an appropriate
Okay.
venue for addressing her concept of this thing.
Okay.
It had actually come up in a, some kind of meeting, I don't know if it was a commissioners meeting, but anyway, there was a meeting, it actually involved, people from the, Chamber of Commerce, okay? And Gene and I actually went and spoke with, the person, he was the former head, the director of the Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
And now his name is escaping me. He's an attorney down here on the avenue.
Jay Becker.
I'm sorry?
Jay Becker.
Jay Becker, yes, thank you. And so we kind of fleshed out what the concept was, and it's something that the county has in place presently, and so we kind of built off of that.
Okay.
Um,
I guess
And-
I was asking a question more about the idea about having an ordinance have a rulemaking part, sort of a more global kind of process thing.
Yeah, what we're talking about in
Yeah.
that is to provide the administrative people, like the city manager, the building inspector, or the code enforcement administrator, or whatever, sort of guidelines about certain parts of an ordinance, and you don't know what they are until they pass an ordinance. But at least give them the framework to make a decision that would be consistent from that point on with every
Kind
position
of
that
to
comes
address
in.
the whole unwritten practice issue is what
Yeah,
you're
but,
Exactly.
talking
but
about.
so for example, if there was an issue, nuance in an ordinance, it's
Right.
not clear,
Yeah.
which way do we go on this? And so maybe you decide, and I think frankly, it would be best to bring it up before the Board of Commissioners. Okay,
Yeah,
let
'cause
let them deliberate it, talk about their interests. Somebody then, maybe the city attorney would draft a document, okay, which would then be published, you know, goes out on the board in the lobby, goes up on the website, and, you know, put out some PR to the press and whatnot. And essentially says, you have 60 days to give us your input on what you think about this nuance. And at the end of that period, then somebody, building inspector, if it's zoning, somebody's gonna go in and look at the issues that have been presented, maybe come up with a new draft, you know, run it through the city attorney, then it comes back to the Board of Commissioners, and they make a decision, yes, this is what we wanna do, boom.
This is all related to unwritten practices, is that
Yep.
what?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yes.
So basically, you want to create a code ordinance that addresses unwritten practices? That's
No.
what we're
We
doing.
No.
want to create an
No.
ordinance that will just provide the framework for
Yeah.
rules,
Right.
not an
The
ordinance,
process.
but operational rules.
It's kind of a process. It's a way of having ordinances operate that's different than what we do now by having this rulemaking or policies and procedures
It would be consistent.
be attached to the code so that there's consistency
One of the things we got caught up in was about
application.
5 or 6 years ago, or maybe a little longer, when the Sokoloff case came to the federal court. The judge lambasted Rehoboth for having rules of thumb as opposed to written procedures.
Yeah.
Because he said a few cognoscenti, his words,
Yeah.
would know what was going on in town and who could do what, but the majority of the people have no clue.
So this is an overarching kind of a recommendation we
Right.
might make as a committee.
Yeah, not
That
for
be-
micromanagement, but for
Right.
just considering.
But I'm gonna use it, I'm gonna use it in the context of the tree ordinance.
Oh,
I mean, it's one of the elements that I'm responsible for. I'm gonna put it in as, you know, yeah, it's gonna be broader when it gets, you know, hits Broadway, but,
I mean, personally, I think we could make that recommendation just in general. I mean, we are the Law Oversight Committee. We were kind of
yeah.
told, look at these
Right.
two things
Yep.
first, but
Yep.
it looks like you guys
Yeah.
you surfaced something that's
Correct.
generally applicable and might be a really good idea.
right.
And I think it is a good idea.
Maybe in the long run, a better thing for the committee to do than the micromanagement we were doing with the tree ordinance.
Well, it would solve a lot of problems, you're
Right, so
saying.
one more
you know?
time in layman's terms, just because I'm still
Okay.
kind of, so basically, unwritten, we talked about this before, unwritten
Practices.
practices.
Would become written.
Well, isn't that what the code is?
Not, it's kind of
Well,
different.
The code is the general structure, but then you have to operate under the code. When somebody comes into the office, to the building inspector's office to apply for a building permit, everything is not gonna be exactly like the ordinances say.
Right.
Sometimes they're gonna be a little bit off, or a little bit one way or the other.
Okay.
This is just to provide a structure for the building inspector to look at and say, you know, for the last 3 times, we reacted this way, so this time we should react that way also.
Basically a precedent.
A what?
It's-
precedent.
It's,
A
yeah.
So
precedent.
you're looking at,
exactly.
this is the way we did it
Yeah,
before.
Exactly.
Well, don't precedents eventually turn into codes?
Not necessarily.
Could, but they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
'cause-
in this city especially, for many years, it was not a precedent, it was somebody's whim.
Right,
I won't say who, but
There's interpretation.
right.
you
No,
know.
I,
Interpretation.
believe me, I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's
Okay.
just a different way of doing it.
And, but a lot of that winds up at boards of adjustments and variance boards because it doesn't quite meet the letter and the intent of the code and somebody has to make a decision on it.
Well, and
sometimes-
indeed, in this administrative variance draft, whatever we're calling it, that's an option. If you appeal the variance, you go to the Board of Adjustment.
And what we're trying to do, or what we were thinking about trying to do, is eliminate having to go to the Board of Adjustment for things that are so ordinary.
De
and
minimis.
happen
De
all the
minimis,
time.
exactly, that's the
minimis.
term.
Yet we don't want to give the power to the authority having jurisdiction to make a decision based on that particular
no,
event
you
because
know
it
what,
could
yeah.
be unfair depending on who it's made for.
You
But
know,
it's
we're
kinda
just
going to
paying
the-
$1,000 every time somebody has,
It would have to be de
Hard time
minimis.
making up,
I mean,
yeah.
the de minimis would have to be something that's,
And that's in the language.
you know, but you have to define your de minimis,
Yeah.
you know, so that it fits with the city and the Board
Right.
of Adjustment. You're not taking away the Board of
Right.
Adjustment's job,
Okay, got it.
I think.
All right.
Got it.
All right, so Ms. Lingo should be coming anytime now, so if you want to go ahead and get started on your
Okay.
item.
Be right back.
Sure. Again, okay, so.
We're talking about your goals of the tree
Oh, the
ordinance.
goals of the tree ordinance.
I'm
I
sorry,
guess-
forgive me.
No, that's okay.
We're item B1,
Yeah, and.
7B1.
Got it.
Sorry.
That's all right. So if this is a document that I put together because, not to necessarily have us look at these things one by one, and actually in review, I found at least one more that I omitted,
Uh-oh.
but, yeah.
What was that?
The one that I omitted, and I found it, okay, where is it? It was under 25335. Let me see my copy. I found it in a note from it was 253-26E on page 2, the top of page 2. And what I said is, yeah, 253-20, minimum tree density
Okay.
requirements. And if you look at item E, it says mandates replacement of trees that become diseased or die on properties.
Okay.
And one of the things that's also in E is the reference, and it's really put in there, to my way of thinking, in a very awkward way. But there's a provision in there that says that if a property changes ownership by being conveyed or transferred in either inheritance or sale or gift or whatever, that if that property was kind of grandfathered, not in compliance, in terms of its 3 trees, that it then has to, if the property ownership changes, if they previously didn't have, just like if you have a building permit, you do a building of a certain degree, you then have to put in the number of trees, the minimum density of 3 trees. There's also a provision in there that says if your property changes hands, you have to do that. And this is something that, in my understanding, has not, I don't know that it's ever been enforced because there's no way for the city to know when properties transfer. There's nothing that gets sent to the city when a property gets transferred.
Okay.
There's nothing that triggers them.
All right.
So that's a category of folks who don't end up probably meeting that.
Slip between the
They
cracks.
slip between the cracks.
Yeah,
And the planning commission made that comment. So this was just my attempt to look through because, and this is kind of in line with our talk before about goals.
Yes.
And, you know, that we need to look at this in terms of goals. So this was my attempt to look through the code and see where the goals were not realized. So if we're looking, when we're looking to modify, if we do continue to do this section by section, this is kind of a heads up to folks who are looking at those sections to say, oh, okay, maybe that isn't doing what the goal says it's supposed to do. Maybe it's not accomplishing that. That's kind of why I put this together.
Okay.
As an aid to us as we look at the
Okay.
sections to see if indeed it satisfies the goals or it misses the
All right.
misses the goals.
So, does anybody care to comment on what we've got here? No? Okay. Are you good then?
I'm good.
Okay,
I'm good.
thank you.
Thank you.
That's appreciated.
Sure.
I might get back to you on the 25326. I don't want to get sidetracked here because we got an all-star in the house here, so.
Okay.
But did you take into consideration the changes that we had made previously? We've addressed 25326 already.
I did not, because
Okay. No
my
problem.
brain couldn't probably hold
All right.
all that.
That's okay.
But
That's okay.
that was my next step of
Yeah,
things to
that's
do.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so for the record, I'm going to indicate that the city arborist, Liz Lingo, has come to our meeting. Thank you very much for being here. You can come on up, sure.
Make it easy for Ann and get me recorded.
Yeah, there you go. So we've had a conversation about two more provisions in the tree ordinance, 25338 and 25339. And Sandy Bieber was the person who provided the information. He had, excuse me, he had to leave. He's attending a wedding in the Washington area. And you guys please help me here, but there were some issues that flowed out of his suggestion, which you got a copy of what he had. But there's some things, and I'm going to start with 25338A, and maybe would you like a copy of the thing to
Yeah,
look at?
sure. Whatever you
Hang
have.
on. On paper. Okay. Here we go.
Sorry, I just got in for the field, so I don't have it. I can go grab my tablet if I need
No.
to.
No,
Okay.
it's right here. This is his document. Come on, fingers.
Ann caught me just as I was walking in.
So,
35.
it's 38. Oh,
Okay.
there you go.
Is it in this?
Yeah, it's in there.
Okay.
Thank you, Ann.
35A, protection and mitigation.
No, 38.
38.
38.
6.
That might be at the back, because that was about the last thing that Ann received.
Okay.
38. 39. 38, enforcement and remedies.
Yeah.
Okay.
In A, it talks about the inspection process, and it talks about it being set up as an annual inspection at the point when the replacement trees have been there for 2 years. And so the question for you is, does this seem like an appropriate way to address this issue? Is this, I mean,
What issue?
well, having the burden, you would have the burden, or your office would have the burden
Me. I
of
have no office.
of conducting an inspection annually of every property that's been subjected to this provision. Okay? After 2 years, you got to go and inspect this thing and make sure those trees are alive and kicking.
Yeah. It's that's not feasible. It's not feasible. I mean, I'd be inspecting
Yeah,
half
what
the
else would you do?
properties.
You know,
That, pretty much.
Yeah.
We do the 2-year, well, I do the 2-year. If there were problems, the 2-year, we could do it after that. But not really had any problems.
but again, I don't see, if somebody complains about something, you're gonna address the issue without regard for whether it was the subject of a tree planting requirement, tree
Well-
replacement issue.
I think that's more like you go out there and the trees are gone, or the trees are dead or half dead,
Right.
more than
Yeah.
like complaints.
But again, it's not something that you would, if you were driving by and you see that, you're gonna.
Don't see it. It's usually in the backyard and it's usually fenced.
Yeah,
You can see the
yeah,
front
yeah,
yard
yeah,
tree,
Yeah.
but
So let me, my thought, as I expressed earlier today, was we have a requirement, I guess it's in the tree planting part of the thing, where, or a mitigation, I don't know where it is, it's in there, where there's a responsibility on the part of the city arborist to go out at some point, I guess it's a year, to make sure that the mitigation has
Trees were planted.
been done. And it seems to me that that sort of language, that sort of concept would be the more appropriate way to handle this enforcement issue.
I don't see, it's a huge problem. I've said this before, but going out at that year mark, half of the trees aren't planted. The best way to deal with that is to have some sort of bond or something.
That, and
Because it's just a huge fight.
I'm
with
with
that.
you on that. We've
Yeah.
already discussed this. I think we've discussed it at a meeting, in fact, and
Yep.
that puts the onus on the property owner.
To call in for the inspection and tell us you're ready.
Right, and more importantly, that the trees are in the ground and
Yeah.
and that they're good, yeah. So that sort of logic could be applied in this case as well. Do you agree?
You could, yeah.
Well,
There
I
could be
mean,
a
I'm
bond,
open.
there could be a bond held, it's not uncommon in tree codes for a bond to be held a year after construction for the trees. And then have that bond refunded to you upon
Sure.
that 1-year inspection.
Sure. Would you have a different approach that you would? We don't need the
I
answer
don't-
today.
Well, I don't know what other
Okay,
approach there could be
Okay,
to it,
okay.
because we have nothing. If I go out and the trees aren't there, they're half dead, all we can do is write a letter.
Mhm.
They have their CO. That's all there is. We have nothing to hold them to anything.
So you're saying at 50% of the time when someone has a tree plan to plant, they haven't done it within a year,
In my experience,
in your
yes.
experience?
When I first started and I was
Uh-huh.
doing previous,
Right.
permits from before me, I'd say 75% weren't done. Now it's closer to like 40 to 50.
Mm.
But yeah, it's bad.
So Jean had a comment about the permitting process and how it applies in this case. Do you want to restate that for her?
What Sandy and I were looking at was the fact that the way this was written, your inspections would never close out a permit. And so it would be open and you'd have to go inspect it every year for the rest of your life.
Permit. Or the application.
But I guess the other thing that just occurred to me, based on your conversation, was if we've got a problem with this many people not finishing up their stuff, why don't we do provisional COs instead of final COs?
Well, I don't have anything to really do with the CO. I sign off and it's complete, but I
Well,
don't-
moreover, that may not even apply.
yeah, I mean, that's really more in the realm of the chief building inspector.
That's a good point. I give you that.
Well, if they don't, if the house and the property doesn't meet the requirements, including under the tree ordinance, then there's no reason to give them a final CO.
Got it.
The new houses they're not as much of a problem with making the trees planted
That's
because they don't
probably true.
get the CO unless the trees are planted. That's it.
Right.
Final story. There is no exception with
Yeah.
that. It's the random homeowner who's not doing work and wants to remove, 5 trees, has to plant one, and then they have a year to get them planted.
Right.
So
I don't have too many problems with the 2-year inspection.
I'm just wondering if this code just has been written poorly and
Well-
it doesn't mean what it sounds like it does, because I was looking at a way to change this and I thought if with something like, in addition, after a 24-month establishment period for tree planting mitigation, the city will inspect the required plantings at least one time, period. Because, I mean, to me, you just take out a year. They're essentially saying after 2 years, the city will inspect the required plantings at least
And
once.
that's kind of going to what I was saying.
And that, don't you think that's
Yeah.
But
maybe?
what happens if it doesn't meet the inspection?
Well, at least once. So what Liz said is if there's a problem, then she would put in a
Yeah.
plan and then come
Yeah,
back
so-
to make sure.
I'm sorry.
You would write them a letter saying you're not in conformance
Right.
as per this section of the code. You have, I forget what it is, 30 days.
Yeah.
30 days to conform. Here's your time frame. Here's your required action. If you have questions, call.
And that would be in the case where you go out and find that they haven't done anything, right?
Yeah, or the trees are dead. So,
Yeah,
because
whatever.
they've already planted them.
Right.
That's a given.
Right.
They don't get their CO. But say I go out 2 years later and the tree is just like laying on its side in the yard. Then they get a letter that says, as per your planting plan and the section of the code, you have to replace it by the state.
So,
But-
yeah,
oh,
so
okay.
at least one time doesn't preclude Liz doing it or the city arbors doing it more than once. I mean, I don't know. And
Yeah.
then in violations of this article, I mean, if we wanted to, or we could include that a letter will be sent or something if we want to get that specific about what's the current process.
Well, and indeed, that kind of leads me into, you kind of stealing Susan's thunder over there, and she's writing feverishly. I mean, she's coming up
I
with,
am.
she's
I'm
coming
not.
up with a
I'm gonna
the
give this to you and
solution.
then I'm going to leave. No, I'm not kidding.
So.
But I can actually listen and do this.
Yeah,
at the
so
same
her
time,
point
so
earlier,
I'm not
Susan's
drawing,
point earlier was,
Writing.
how can we simplify this?
The inspection
This,
after?
section A.
This whole
Section A.
section, it was section A.
I was actually referring to the entire code, not just.
Well,
section.
yeah, I
I
appreciate that,
understand.
but you
No, I
said it,
understand.
you
Okay.
said it in the context of
yes.
that
You
thing,
did.
so that's
Just to
where.
clarify, that was
Yeah,
not just
yeah.
referring to
We'll-
that
We'll keep bringing that
20.
issue up.
52 words that could be written in 3. I was referring to the entire thing. So. Can I ask a question real quick? Just a general question while Liz is thinking
Let's
here?
give her a chance to.
No.
Okay. Oh, she's still reading that section? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I don't see how you can make that any shorter if you want it to say what it says.
I heard what I read.
Uh,
I'll get back to that, but I was gonna ask.
A few words maybe, but it's two different things.
Okay,
One
so-
is saying we have the right to inspect while there's an active permit or a pending one. And then the other is about the inspections and the mitigation at 24 months and 1 year.
Yeah.
So there's, I mean,
Well, I think we're gonna nuke that based on what you're saying.
the last sentence could be put, I mean, that could kind of go in a general section because there's going to be other times where something's not in conformance, right? So
Yeah, I don't
it
even
could
think
just,
that belonged in there.
it could just always be
Yeah, it
30
seems-
days.
Yes, that's why I didn't even include it, fine, because it just doesn't seem.
What do
like
you
it
think of
belongs.
that last sentence, Liz, in A?
The maintenance shall
Yeah.
include, I think it could be probably covered somewhere else.
I do too. It just seems like it's a non sequitur in there.
It really should be in the other one.
So basically, this is what I wrote, was at any point before, during, or after the permit process, the city may inspect a lot to determine compliance with this article. The required inspection would be performed after a 24-month establishment period. Performed and documented by the city after a 24-month establishment period.
You don't need documented everything. I mean, it has to be documented. There's no other way. It's all scheduled in the computer, in the system. But, yeah, I mean, that says almost the same thing to me, pretty much.
You know, I think that last sentence throws us because of the use of the word maintenance.
It belongs
Essentially,
in there. It's
well,
nothing to do
essentially,
with it.
kind of what it's saying. See, Liz kind of said if she goes out after a year and the tree is dead, dying, absent,
Yeah.
then she sends
A notice of
a
violation.
notification. Yeah, then it says, you know, that what a person has to do to take care of it is replace unhealthy or dead material within 30 days after notification of violation in conformance with the approved tree plan. But the word maintenance, it just throws you because, you know, doesn't make any sense. You might want to move whatever that sentence is, taking out maintenance, down to C if you want to keep it. Because that refers to the 30-day rule for compliance, and that's what that is that 30-day rule for compliance, if there's an interest in saying, because it says what the city does, if you want to have that in there.
The easiest thing to do is just have a section that's nothing but your violations and penalties and like procedural, and it would just go there. The violation for this is blank. The penalty for this is blank. Penalty for not conforming with an approved tree plan is blank.
Could that not be one section of the code specifically? So no matter what you did in any other section of the code, it says,
It's covered.
like I just wrote, if you do something wrong, you faced with civil and potential criminal penalties as defined in section blank of the city penalty code.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to put it in every
And then
single
we set up,
section of the
we
code.
set up a
City penalty
fee
code
schedule.
section.
A
I
fee
think that's
schedule
easier.
that Sandy has referenced.
Can you do that? Mr.
Why
Lawson?
not?
The other thing I was thinking, because we talked about it already, is one way it might be easier to do this would be to go the bond route. Because that way, when it's not done, they forfeit the bond.
I
The city
really,
takes
And
money.
you know how much time and effort goes in our behalf when people don't conform and we have to send them a notice of violation.
Yeah.
It is never ending, because it's not just you send it to them and then they just happily take care of it. You'll have emails and calls and voicemails, and you'll have to go out and meet them and show them exactly. Then you'll have to go meet the landscaper. Then you'll have to send them a second and final notice, certified mail. Then you'll have to go out again for a final inspection. Then what happens if they still don't do it after that?
On new properties in the jurisdiction that I worked in, you had to post a bond for your landscaping.
But the
Pretty
new
common.
property
When you
here
got the
is-
permit.
Is better because we've got the.
You posted the
CO
bond,
CO
and then you
doesn't
didn't
get
get a CO until they were in,
But the
and
non
you got your bond
property,
back. Yeah,
yeah, it's
So
it's
the
the
bond
older
would be great.
property. It would also
Yeah.
have to post
Yeah.
a bond.
then you
I
wouldn't
mean-
have to put a bond in it or anything.
What happens if people just say, oh, I don't care, keep my money?
That's how you have to make the bond higher than the cost of plantings.
Right, make the bond like twice the
Yeah.
cost of
Mhm.
replacing the tree or something.
yeah, and that's what they always did.
But still, it has to be enough money that people want to comply. But so,
It's a-
but
Well, you need
it's a
enough money
place
to
to
do
start.
it, or enough money for the city to hire somebody to go out there and just stick a new tree in.
Yeah, and everybody's
Well,
assuming that
and
everybody
you could have a
doesn't wanna
two-part
do it.
thing, you know,
That's what I
you
don't-
forfeit
There
your
will be some
bond and
people.
you're subject to further
Yeah,
prosecution.
I hear you, yeah.
But we got to remember too
Maybe
that
double jeopardy.
Huh, double jeopardy?
like if they didn't want to plant them, then they would just go to park and shade anyways and not have to plant them. So we're not really like, even if they don't plant the trees, the outcome is really no different, to be honest with you.
So can I ask you a question, just a generic question? And you know, think honestly about this. What would this city look like if people were allowed to landscape their lots however they wanted, but with a minimum of 4 canopy trees? But then you could do what you wanted.
Or two
What
canopies.
would
What do
it
you
look
mean
like?
you could do what you wanted?
I mean, let's just say 2 canopies or 4, whatever. Just say, you know, you needed 2 decent sized trees or 4 decent sized trees, depending on whatever, square footage of your
Okay.
lot. 5,000 square foot lot, you need 2, anything over you need,
Okay.
you know, what would it look like? Like if I was a property owner in, you know, Columbia Avenue, and I had my house and I know I had my required setbacks, and you came to me and said, you need 2 canopy trees on your property.
And then you can get rid of everything
And
else.
then you could do whatever else you wanted to your lot. What would people do? Would they tear it all out and put stones in? Would they make it beautiful? Would they plant their flowers? What would people do?
Some. I think a lot of people live in, if you're talking about in the Pines, I think people live there because they like the established canopy. But that's not the trend you see with the newer homes, or people that tear houses down and build new ones don't want trees. So I think the people that are existing and living there, the majority would keep their lots as they are.
Okay, so,
But if you had a requirement that said you have to have 1, 2, or trees that are of such quality that they're gonna benefit the canopy goal, isn't that feasible?
What do you mean? What do you mean? Is it feasible?
Is it something that we could work into these requirements? In other words, as we've stated earlier, in 2 different areas here, moving from a no culture to a yes or just a maybe concept of working with the city.
So you can do what you want, but you just have to keep 2 trees.
well, just theoretically, what would it look like? In your eyes, what would people do?
I think anybody who all along has wanted less trees immediately will clear everything out that they can.
And would that be a bad thing for the overall tree canopy?
Yes, you'd be losing tree. I mean, we have lots that are wooded. Not all of them, but in the north section of Rehoboth. A lot
But
of
would it
lots are
make
wooded.
up for it with the people that have none having to put the other ones in?
Oh, now they have to, everybody else has to plant them?
Yeah.
No, I didn't get that
Yeah.
part.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Not initially, no. I mean, maybe long-term, possibly.
I think we gotta look at it that way, that's our goal.
We're kind of, I guess
Yeah.
we're kind of grappling with kind of what's better. Lots of smaller trees, or having 1 or 2 or 3, high canopy trees per lot in terms of benefits across the board.
Or let me put it more specifically.
Okay.
Something that embodies the concepts and goals of the comprehensive tree plan, or whatever your urban tree plan, or whatever we're calling
And
it.
that's, I mean, there's several different goals in that. One of them is canopy coverage.
Right. Right.
Let me just read something to you guys and tell me if this could be the beginning of starting something different.
Is this
It
specifically
is
to 39 or
specifically
just general?
to 39 because
Okay.
no, it's specifically to all of it, just in
Okay.
general, while
I-
Liz is here. The goal of our city is to protect and enhance our valuable tree canopy. Every lot must have at least blank canopy trees from the city's approved canopy list. Any private or public entity who deliberately endangers these trees will be faced with civil and potential criminal penalties as defined in section blank, blank, blank of the city's penalty code. If for any reason any of these blank number of trees must be replaced, it must be replaced with a minimum blank caliper tree from the list of approved trees. There's a list of approved trees and there's a list of prohibited species that can't be planted. What would happen to this town?
So how are you gonna make everybody plant trees? I don't understand that part. I don't think that's possible.
Right?
But
Maybe only if you ever come in for a permit do you have to plant a tree.
Or if you're
You know?
taking down a tree, you've got to replace it
I mean,
with.
Anyone that owns a property in this town doesn't want to diminish the value of the property by diminishing the beauty of this town. I mean, I get it in commercial districts where commercial people are just in it to make a buck. That may have to be a little higher regulated, but overall, in general, anybody spending the kind of money that they're spending to buy in this town, all right, don't want a terrible looking town. And I think, I know I'm oversimplifying, but we can literally, if we could start with that and realistically, even if it involved at some point telling everybody, look, within a year, can you bring us in a little Google map with the 4 trees that you think are your valuable ones that you want to keep? You can start over with new construction and have a bonded thing. You could start over with over 50% remodel, just like any other code. If you destroy more than 50% of a building, it's treated as new construction, okay? You could apply it to anybody coming in with a permit. Then you would have to up to it. But what if you just started over and then built from there? Do you really think everybody's gonna go out and tear down all their trees?
I think a lot of people, yeah, because they'd be afraid that it would go back.
I think another problem in Susan is, I think unfortunately, there's this kind of not in my front yard, not in my backyard kind of thing. I mean, I think people might say, yeah, I love the trees in Rehoboth, but, I don't want them on mine. I'm happy to enjoy them on my neighbor's property. I like the way the town looks, but personally, I want a green lawn and a swimming pool.
But you can have a green lawn and a swimming pool,
Yeah,
but you
again,
have to have
when you
4
get-
trees around
But
it.
when you get into supporting one or more high canopy trees, it's possibly, given current building codes, impossible.
But again, in a
to
way, you're
support that.
penalizing people who have trees on their lot. It's like, I have beautiful trees on my lot, but I can't put a swimming pool in because I
no,
have
they
beautiful
can't.
trees on my lot.
You're wrong with that. If you
But
come
again,
in
if
with
you
a
go,
plan-
I'm talking about without going to a board, without going to a variance, without waiting for months for a
If you can
permit.
put in a swimming pool, you put in
Okay.
a swimming pool, and
Right.
we try and do our best to work with you to minimize
Right.
tree removal, but you put in the pool.
But
end
again,
of
what
the day.
I'm saying is, what would in 20 years from now, this town look like if this is what we started with right now? We would have beautiful, healthy canopy trees. We would have trees not overhanging neighbors' yards. We would have city trees being, maintained and controlled by the city. The city, I basically said private or public entity. So this code applies to the city. You need Article 1, you don't need Article 2. The city's not gonna tear down its own trees. Again, oversimplifying probably, but just to start there. And we could have a phase. We could say, look, okay, for the next 6 months, anybody that wants to do anything needs to come in because we don't want everybody coming in and tearing down all their trees. We're gonna think about this logically, okay? But what if we did that? What if we did that?
We would lose a lot of trees.
Okay,
Well,
but
I
in the
mean,
long run, in
you would
20 years,
lose-
where would you be?
I mean, if you had some kind of provision, a tree removal, as we've already got, a tree removal restriction.
In that case, you're pretty much doing away with like the permit application, the plan, like all of that pretty much goes. You got 2 decent trees, you're good. Permits, plan review, all of that, inspections, even those will be less because I'll just look at 2 trees,
So how do you feel about that?
Job security. She's like, I think it's a terrible idea. No, I'm kidding.
No,
No, I'm just saying.
She's got
What,
plenty to
what
do.
would really happen though, and that's what I just think we need to just breathe and think about that for a minute before we literally spend hours and hours and hours on how we're going to punish people for what they're doing. I mean, this is how new developments start. New developments start that way. There are communities that have historic districts. If you need to replace it, you have to replace it with this kind of paint and this kind of this. And they're beautiful. And there are developments that have committees where you must go to make sure everybody's within the realm. You can't have 10 sheds on your property, something like that.
I mean, I worked in a historic district where if you wanted to remove a tree over a certain size, you had to hire a certified consulting arborist, which runs you about $500 to $1,000 and provide ultrasonic root testing, like resistant graft. I mean, you ran for $1,000 if you wanted to remove a tree.
Right. But
I mean,
again,
they're
this
very
would put 2, 3, 4, I don't know how many, again, I don't know your job that way. Good sized canopy trees growing. How big can a 3-inch tree get in 20 years? What are they gonna have? What kind of canopy are you gonna have? 20 foot, 25 foot?
It depends on the species.
Okay,
Some grow fast, some don't.
okay. So if we get a list with ones
And the
that
care.
grow fairly fast and live long.
I think that'll really mess with our age balance in the city. One thing you want is to have a good distribution of like young, medium, and old trees. And with that, I think we'll really be heavy in the young trees, which we already are citywide, like public trees. We're already lower on the young and small trees than the large canopy old trees. So that would really mess with that distribution.
So
for
what if
sure.
the people came in and said, you know, somebody has a lot that's completely wooded, and they said, you know what, I'm taking advantage of this code, I'm gonna come in, I'm picking my 4 trees. Liz, do you approve these 4 trees? And if you do, I'm taking everything else down. But these are my 4 trees, and I gotta keep these trees.
And then I'm gonna come in 3 months later and I'm gonna say, well, now I'm building a new pool and it's going right where these 3 trees are.
Well, no.
That's how this will
These
happen.
trees have to be in the setback areas. Okay, everybody has required front, rear, and side yard setbacks. So you don't say I'm keeping the 4 trees that are where my house. You keep the 4 trees where your house is going, then you can't get a permit to put the house there. So people have to say these are going to be my trees.
Yeah, but plans change, then you sell the property and then somebody wants to put in a
But
pool
it
there
still
or
doesn't
a
matter. The
shed.
setbacks don't change.
Take your point about the
setbacks don't change.
setback.
Okay?
Good luck
'Cause-
finding perfect trees in the setback. I mean, that's just, sometimes in good situations and they come in to develop it, sometimes they are in the setbacks, sometimes they're not. It just depends on the lot.
Right, but
Well,
again,
a tree
you can't-
planting, a tree planting.
I mean,
I mean,
you know what it
that's-
costs to
you-
tear down a
you're
tree?
picking up on something
For
I'm
somebody to
thinking.
come in and tear down a whole wooded lot worth of trees,
It's expensive.
it's gonna cost them $50,000-$60,000.
Probably not that much, but
I'm paying $5,000 to have 4 trees taken out. Okay, now granted, if you're doing it all at once, it's probably cheaper. But there is no way I would come in and say, hey, clear my lot. And then I'll hope maybe I'll get shade from my house, and I hope maybe I'll, people aren't, people in general are good, and they're not stupid. There's a few people out there, but we are literally writing a code for a few people that want to be jerks about this. I think we need to reverse and go back to, let's write the code for the people that want to live in a beautiful city. And if you have a problem, write that city penalty code and deal with them. Bond the new construction.
It seems to me that there's room in a rear setback for at least 1 quality tree and possibly 2. 50 feet, 20 by 50 feet? Or is it 14? I forget, what's the setback in the back?
15.
15
unless you have a
feet.
shed and stuff like that.
And a lot of people
Well,
don't
can
want
you
to.
put a
yours-
shed in the setback?
There was a time when pools were a detriment. People if you wanted to sell your house, they said fill in the pool. People don't want the maintenance. They don't want the care. Now, I understand that it's turning into a, Airbnb place, and that needs to be regulated from another part of the code. But, give people a chance to do what's right. And
think
not
those-
feel like I can't.
Those people, this code isn't really a problem. If you just
Right.
go about your normal life, a tree dies or becomes hazardous and you have to take it out, you replace it and you move on.
Right.
None of this
Right.
really affects them
Right,
in general. Like they won't have too many problems with it.
right. So we
During development or people that want to find ways around things, yeah, they'll have a problem with it because they'll want to say, well, this sentence, I want to read it like this.
Liz, can you answer a question for me? I know I've asked you this before, and, one of the things that, when people come in and they have to mitigate the loss of a tree based on the inches, the caliper inches, it's, a certain number of trees, each of a certain caliper that they have to often replace it with. And so sometimes what you'll get is, 5, vertical hornbeams replacing, an oak or a loblolly pine.
Yeah, because
And, yeah,
the mitigation it can be any native species.
yeah. And I
Yeah,
guess
let's not drift too far off the
Okay, well, this, I'm
subject
not,
here.
I'm not. Just-
Okay,
This
alright.
is within, what I'm asking, Liz, is that, how is it considered that is a value
Oh.
as opposed to, replanting the tree that you've taken out that will in time become an iconic high canopy tree? I kind of don't get the value.
I think what you're getting at
Exchange.
is 50 hornbeams, the same as 1 canopy oak.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying.
But over the long term, what you've done is lost canopy oak, and for however long, you then have these 5 hornbeams that are just kind of
Which are
a
nice
living
trees,
fence.
but
They're not. They don't. So why would we want to value 5 hornbeams over a replacement oak or blah, blah, blah pine?
Honestly, if you're just looking at shade and like the impressive canopy, no. I mean, environmentally, I think you could make an argument that like in terms of the carbon and
Right.
oxygen and all that,
Right.
and you could probably make the argument that it's equal. But that's just tree codes find different ways to like value a tree, and one of them is size.
Got it.
So I mean, you could change it so that if you pull out an oak, it has to be replaced with oaks.
Got it.
You know, and if you can't fit 10, if you take out a 30-inch oak and you have to put 10 3-inch oaks back,
I mean, but here's what
then
I'm
you
saying.
just pay for the ones you can't put back.
Yeah. So, okay. What if you don't? I mean, what if you don't pay for it? You just replace an oak with an oak? Because that's all you got room for. There's no room anywhere else in the town to put the 9 other oaks.
And then you have a huge loss in value. So
Temporarily.
Well, you have a temporary
100
loss
years, 50
in-
years.
But they're gonna die eventually anyway. So
one of the things when we talk about preserving and perpetuating the canopy, we talk about succession, is having the old trees die and then having the newer trees. But the way the code's written now, that old tree's never gonna be replaced. It's gonna be permanently, its space is gonna be taken up with these little, to me, less long-term valuable trees.
Doesn't have to be. You could choose, you could elect to plant an oak and pay a fee in lieu of mitigation for the others.
Okay, what if you didn't have any fee in lieu of mitigation?
And why do we need the others if we're saying all we need are 4 big canopy trees per lot?
Because you're saying we only
Yeah,
need 4
we're-
canopy.
yeah.
That's not what the code says.
Yeah, I know, but we're talking about if
Listen,
you
when
write
you-
the code
At the end of the
completely
day-
differently.
I know, and I know at one point we were thinking about number of trees per size, which some people do. Inches is another way.
Right,
Canopy
right.
coverage is another way.
But canopy coverage is sometimes used as a
Measurement.
measurement.
And that's basically the bottom line for everything that we're talking about: green, oxygen, shade,
I mean,
environment.
eventually,
I mean,
temporarily, you've got
doesn't-
less.
The main way you value, if you want to go and get your tree valuation, become certified in that through, you have to be consulting arborist first, so it's difficult. One of the main ways they value a tree, say it's damaged, say somebody runs over it, is by size. That is the main way you put a dollar value on a tree, is by the size. You take the biggest available, so say a 30-inch oak is damaged and the biggest
Right.
available oak is 3 inches and it costs $300. You take that times 10, tree was worth $3,000. At the heart of it, that is the easiest way to value a
And-
tree.
and-
Now, location and condition all come into play.
And is the
That's-
value?
We need to wrap this up.
Okay.
That's okay, go
Okay,
ahead,
is
finish
the-
your point.
Is the value a factor of if you replace the tree with the same size tree, that's what you'd have to pay for it at a nursery?
Yeah.
Got it.
Largest available in this, usually they do by
Largest-
state.
Okay,
So-
so it's not a value on carbon, on other benefits,
There are other ways-
softer benefits.
There are
but-
multiple ways to value a tree. That's the
Right,
easiest
but the
one.
easiest one is replacement.
Yeah, just
I got
cost.
it. Cost,
Yep.
okay.
It's all relative to
So
nature.
if I may, I'd like to get back on track here and go back to, forgive me, 25339 with the revised section A, and specifically with regard to Julie Davis's inserting the building inspector, and also the concept of the Parks and Shade Tree Commission. First of all, I believe you had told me at some prior meeting that the chain of command for you is not to the building inspector, but rather to the city manager. Is that correct?
Yes, I report directly to Sharon.
Okay. And then with regard to the insertion of the building inspector, and also the provision or that term of the Parks and Shade Tree Commission, what is your opinion about removing, well, building inspectors out because he's not applicable as far as I'm concerned, but as to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission, with respect, I would rather put that burden on you exclusively than,
I don't even see where this is. We're in 25339.
I think that's where we are.
I don't see any.
Where was that?
Oh, you know where we are. I think,
Did I-
are you thinking
did I drift?
of- Yeah, I think you're thinking of Sandy's rewrite
Yeah.
of B,
Yeah.
which is.
Oh, B. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
of
Forgive me. I'm
B.
sorry.
Am I in the wrong page?
Oh, I'm
It's
sorry.
a-
No,
the page
that was
it's
my
all
fault. I
green.
said A. I said A.
It's all green. I think the rewrite
Yeah.
of B.
Yep, I see building inspector.
Yeah, yeah.
Hang on. let me- Too much stuff here.
Yeah, I think this is
Yeah.
what you were thinking of, right there.
Yeah. Thank you.
God, you bet. It's the all green page.
I don't see why anybody needs to assess the fee. It should just be set.
I'm sorry?
The fee, whatever the fee they're talking about.
Well,
it
that's
should just be
actually,
set.
I'm gonna get to that next. What's your thought about your role versus having
Violations.
the Parks and Shade Tree Commission involved in?
City arborist, adjustments, Park and Shade Tree Commission. Honestly, probably most of the time that'll be utilized would be through the chief building inspector.
Really?
Yeah, because we'll withhold a permit.
Oh, I see, okay.
Like, you don't get your CO,
Yeah.
you don't get your building permit, or whatever it may be. I mean, I can
Well,
violate.
what if it's just a tree replacement?
What is, I don't even understand what the plan does. Failure to obtain approval for a mitigation plan, well, you just don't get your permit. That's a condition of the permit, so that doesn't even make sense. Failure to maintain all required trees as reflected in plan. I don't really know what violations they're trying to address, but in general, I think where it says any other appropriate city official or entity works.
Okay,
I think that's fine.
okay, that's good enough for me. I think
I
that's
mean,
kind of
you
what we were saying to
By the
Sandy
city
as well.
arborist, or is that what
Yeah.
you were
Yeah,
saying?
I mean, you can take
Yeah,
out
take
the-
out B
Right.
of A and.
Right, okay, thank you, that's good.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
that way we can withhold
right.
any.
4 times the amount of the whatever, and then all that business. I mean, would the bond concept work in this instance? Is that something we could,
I don't really get what this is trying to penalize people for. Failure to maintain trees is
yeah,
required.
yeah, you're going out, no, you're going out and you're inspecting a property where they were required to replace a tree.
Like 2 years
And it's
or a
either,
year
and it's
from the
either
permit.
dead and it's, or it's not there or what have you.
So we're talking about the same thing we were talking about
Yeah,
10 minutes ago.
and A, yeah,
Yeah, so it'd be the same, if we had the bond, then we wouldn't release the bond.
okay,
We can leave the other part in that you can
I'm liking that,
hold all pending
And-
applications or something.
right.
So
And,
that basically means that unless you resolve it,
yeah.
you can't ever do anything with your house.
And are you
can't
comfortable
do
with
anything.
Gene's suggestion about 2 times the amount of the estimated price of the, I guess you would establish that at the point you were,
2 times, I don't see it.
Gene had suggested a bond in the amount 2 times,
The cost of a tree.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, we could just set a flat rate
Right.
to be adjusted as inflation and tree prices change.
right.
So say we're doing 2-inch trees and the going price is $550 for a 2-inch tree installed,
It's $1,000
$1,100,
bond,
yeah.
yeah. Cool, okay, good. All right, we're getting there, we're getting there. All right, I'm getting kind of lost now. My note-taking kind of drifted off, but what was the issue in C? Oh, the city manager is making a decision. You see that in C?
That's fine.
Yeah, well, why can't it be you? Why can't it be the city arborist? Again, my concept, I'm tamping this down.
To me, because that's an exception, really that should be like if the city manager declares a state of emergency. I should be able to extend it for spring and fall, but I shouldn't be able to just say, oh yeah, you have storm damage, sure, you can have an extra year.
Is this a situation where you've got an initial decision maker and you need a secondary decision maker being the city manager?
What this would be is I send them their letter and then they say,
Yeah,
oh, well,
exactly.
we don't, you have 30 days, and
That's
that
what I'm
puts
saying.
you in at August 1st, and they say,
Alright.
well, we don't live here in the summer, is there any way we can plant it in the fall? And then I will contact Sharon and say, is it okay if we approve them planting in the fall when they move back in their home?
But to my point, better that she makes the decision than you.
I mean, they're few and far in between, so it's not a huge burden on her.
Okay,
I mean, if she really wanted it to be me, that's fine, but it's not a
okay.
big time factor.
All right, 39, where are we? By the way, everyone, my goal is to get out of here by noon. All right, and I've totally lost it now on 39.
I'm still on fines if you remove a tree without a permit.
Take a look at what Sandy said on, I think it's the very last part of, whatever's on that last page. There you go, right there. Isn't that where we were?
253.
See how that hits your comfort zone?
Agreed. I think 2 years is, I've always said that is too harsh, and the fine is nowhere near enough.
So what would you suggest then?
If you know the size of the tree, it should be a per inch,
DBH,
however we're measuring trees.
DBH, I mean, yeah.
Caliper, DBH, however.
Well, if it's an existing tree, it would be DBH.
I don't know what you've decided on the code right now. It's
Yeah,
measured in
DBH.
diameter.
We're gonna get to that.
Whatever shows up on the survey, basically, or if there's a stump present, the measurement of the stump.
Huh.
And if there's no size, it's just unknown, you can't accurately determine it, then a flat fee of 1,000 or whatever it may be.
All right.
And how would you, the other question we had was, you know, if we were going to sort of stair step the penalty to a business as opposed to just coming in, you know, heavy with 2 years, any thought about what might make sense in terms of successive penalties for the business? Sort of, you know, first offense, second offense, third offense, that kind of
Well,
thing, or
what do
whatever.
you guys want to do? What do you think is appropriate? Ultimately, do you want people to lose their license?
I was just
I
gonna
mean,
say,
if-
my statement when we were talking about this was, we're gonna drive all these guys away from town. They're just gonna leave, you know.
No.
Don't think so.
Yeah,
I think
I
there's
may
enough
be
money to
over.
made doing it straight and narrow, they're not
Yeah,
gonna go
yeah.
away.
No,
Yeah.
that won't happen. Your
Okay.
good contractors, the ones that you want here, will stay.
That's kind of my sense.
It's like
But
requiring
they're
a
not
business
gonna-
license in
But they're not
town.
gonna
It's
be
a
found
good
in
thing.
violation either.
No, more than likely, no. I mean,
You're saying
mistakes
that-
happen.
You're saying there are enough good ones that we're gonna,
Right.
nobody's, that we wanna have being in town is
Well.
gonna get chased out of town by.
It's like saying that requiring a business license puts too harsh of a burden on people. Well, we require a business license because when you go to hire a contractor, the baseline You can make sure that they paid their fee in town, they have a state license, and they have insurance.
How about a secondary fine? You know, the primary responsible party is the property owner. But how about a secondary fine for the business?
I mean, you
Is that
could
feasible,
sometimes.
Gene, to have more than one, you know?
But we have nothing to hold the business to. If you hold a property owner, like the fine, you can always put a lien on the property. You
Yeah,
don't have anything in
right.
the business. Usually the business ends up paying because it's
Oh.
I hired you to do my tree work. It was your
Okay.
responsibility to get that permit.
Thank
And you made a mistake and now
Good
you've got to pay
information.
for it.
Thank you, that's good.
Now, if the contractors fly by night and they're gone, it's up to you. But at the end of the day, it has to be a burden. It's the homeowner, really it's the homeowner, property owner's responsibility to hire a qualified contractor
Okay.
that knows what they're doing.
So get the whole business of taking away their license.
So,
Taking away-
I don't think that's unreasonable to an extent. I mean, you could have like,
2 years?
will be issued one initial written warning and then,
Oh, that's going to your stair step
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
and then every subsequent violation will result in the loss of a business license for 1 year. That means basically you can make a mistake one time.
Got it.
violation.
I mean, we might want to put a time frame on
Yeah,
that too.
I mean,
Like,
you could do a 30-day, thing too.
no, I mean
30,
like,
What would that
6
look
months.
no,
year.
I mean like like if you got a violation 15 years ago, it shouldn't then come into play today. So you need to put
Right.
some sort of limit on that.
It's
Right,
basically the
right.
standard for every single penalty code in this country. You know, you get one warning and then you get a permit, you get 5 years, second probation bus, you get 10 years, they're all stair step.
Liz, are you aware if other business operators or service people are penalized in our code, like in our building code? Do you have any idea?
I'm not aware of
Okay.
that. I
We
mean, I
just-
know if they do, usually they pay
Uh-huh.
the fees. Like, say you did something and now there's a fine of $500 or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Usually the business pays the
The
fee.
business pays. But
Typically,
you're
yeah.
not aware that if a building contractor would get his license revoked for some kind of repeated offense?
Oh, no, I'm not aware of whatever
of
penalties are. in the code.
Operating without a business, without a permit or that kind
Well,
of thing.
if you operate without a business license, that
No,
goes
not
to the
without a
police.
business license, without a permit. I mean, a contractor came in and did work
That,
repeatedly without
yeah,
a.
that becomes, I think that's a criminal citation.
That's
You go to
criminal.
court, yeah.
Okay. I mean, we were just thinking that to me, it would make sense if this business shouldn't be treated differently than any other business, and that the city code should be uniform. in
I think if
terms
you
of-
talk to them, I think they would rather see fees and fines than a criminal citation.
Oh, definitely. But, so I'm just, we didn't know what other businesses, how other businesses were
Pretty sure,
regulated.
yeah, doing work without a building permit, I think, is a criminal.
Interesting.
Are you
Yeah,
guys
you guys have to look
against
into it,
having
but-
one penalty section of the code?
Are we what?
Are you against what we talked about?
Oh,
Are we
yeah,
for or
right.
against it?
One penalty section of the code?
You mean the entire city
Yeah,
code?
remember we
Yeah.
were talking about that before. It
Because everything
I
you're doing
like
right
the
now,
idea.
if you were thinking about doing it, is kind of.
would be in one central provision.
Yeah,
Remember-
so instead of writing everything you're writing, you would be
Right.
phase 1 penalty,
Yeah.
period. And then you go into the code somewhere
Right.
else and write what phase 1 penalty
Yeah,
is. So I just think you're spending a lot of time if you're even thinking about that idea,
right.
that you could,
That's why I asked that question.
you know, and then it would apply to everybody. This is a phase 1 penalty, this is a phase 2, this is a phase 3 violation. See section 4 of the code. But I mean, what we're doing right now is figuring out what phase it would be, and then we can go back and summarize it later, so. Unless you guys think that's a bad idea. But
No, I think we all,
I
are we all
agree.
kind
I
of in
agree, yeah.
agreement that makes sense? I get that.
All right, anything else on 39?
The only thing, Liz, that I just wanted to draw your attention to, because I did with the rest of the folks here, is that it says in this is the current language, I believe, things that are not scratched out or underlined in 253.9, and it says, anybody that violates this shall be punished as described and may be enjoined from continuing the violation.
Yeah.
But then it says each tree cut, damaged, or poisoned shall constitute a separate offense. But then it jumps to any tree removed and talks about fines. It doesn't refer to damaging, poisoning. It doesn't talk about other things that are violations of the code.
The penalty for
The
damaging a tree.
penalties for doing other things
aren't
to
any.
trees, there aren't any.
Well, theoretically, I think there's another section there that kind of lets us pull back, take away the, like we can pull away a permit. It just, there's nothing that outright, it'd be much easier if it said damage to tree, $200 fine, or whatever,
Got it.
fate,
So you-
class 1, or whatever you guys say you
Right.
want to do.
Right.
But yeah, right now, really the only penalty in there is removing a tree without a permit.
Got it. Or damaging. Yeah. Thank you.
So if we're good, I'm gonna ask that we take a look at the 253-25 provision, which is something that I did way back when. And you'll find that right after Sturges's goals paper.
Okay.
It's actually on the backside of her last page. So basically what I'm doing is reworking, I can't even remember what I did here.
Wait, I'm sorry, what? I think I've got multiple copies.
I think I do too.
There's multiple copies of mine in here, that's what happened.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I wondered, 'cause
yeah,
I was like, I was never getting
It's-
through it.
Okay. She just won't shut up.
Yeah, right. You said that.
I did.
You got it,
I
Susan?
got it.
No, just Susan
Oh,
has something.
Susan, it's got the
It's the
first
first
page with
red.
red line on
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
First one in the packet. You must have gotten turned around.
So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm reducing all that business about the tree comprehensive plan, all that jazz, and just saying this is an appeals board.
Can we add a section, which I've seen in other other tree codes for boards, where somebody on there, where appropriate, has to have experience in the industry?
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up. It's Sturgis, oh, I'm sorry.
I mean,
I'm
it
sorry.
may not,
Did you hear what she
I'm
just
still
said?
helping
Yeah,
you.
okay.
it may not always be
I got it,
possible, but
I got it.
Yeah,
we should try.
yeah.
What should we
and
try
so
to do?
This
Out of
is to a point you
those-
raised.
5 members, a minimum of 1 member shall have experience in landscape, arboriculture,
Oh, on
or
the tree commission.
yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
part-
somebody needs to
yeah.
have some experience in that
So-
industry where possible.
I
So
like
if you
that.
have some specific language, I'm happy to incorporate it. 'Cause this is actually something that Sturgis, well, to go all the way back, the planning commission recognized this need and put it in their report as a recommendation. They didn't actually, create a suggested provision, but
Yeah.
they did recommend it. And you brought this up, that was one of the first things
Well,
you
I
were
kind of
talking to me
said
about.
training. And
Yeah, but I
they're-
mean,
they're
that's-
real general about training, so I was thinking more in training in terms of process,
Okay.
how to be an
Okay.
adjudicating board. But I like this
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
I think it's a baseline.
Yeah.
I've seen it in other tree codes, and we have plenty of people in this town who led past lives as professionals that
Oh,
now
sure. Right.
Yeah.
have that knowledge to pass along.
So again, is that something, I don't want to, slow you down is it something you have readily available, some specific language?
I mean, I would just put in kind of what I said.
Okay.
Say
Not
your,
that-
say your 3
all right,
words
okay.
again.
Um,
Experience with,
consists of 5 members, citizens and residents of the city who should be appointed mayor and approval of the commissioners. Where possible, at least 1 member shall have experience in the
Agriculture.
field, in an applicable field such as landscaping,
I'll get it.
or arboriculture.
I'll get it. I'll get it.
Yeah, so something somewhat related to.
Tree.
Yeah.
So otherwise, are you good with what's in there?
Um,
Everybody good with
citizen-
what's in there?
This is a more general question. We may not have the answer. Do you have to be a full-time? You don't have to be full-time to be on
What are you talking about?
A full-time resident of the city.
to be on the commission. The commission.
Oh, does it say that?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
No, it doesn't say it though. I think the answer is no, you don't. There's no requirement on any committee.
Okay.
I
There
mean,
isn't.
frankly,
Okay.
it wouldn't be representative if
Yeah.
that were in there. Okay, good. Sandy Beaver, Sturges Dodge, 25328. What do you got, girl?
Are we up? Am I
Huh?
up?
You're up.
Yeah.
I'm up. Let's see.
Is that in here?
Yeah, it's
in there.
somewhere. Okay, goals.
30.
I am losing.
There it is.
Where is it?
There. Halfway through the packet.
Okay, I have to
I got
start
it.
from the beginning and,
I got tree definitions.
okay, is that what we're looking at?
No.
Is it definitions?
No, what are we looking
Code
at? What is?
revision. Oh, here it is. It's the next page.
After definitions.
Yeah, it's
General
Code.
criteria for determination of specimen trees, tree stands, and historic trees, blah, blah, blah.
LOC May 28, 2019 code revision suggestions for 25328 of the current tree code.
Oh.
Got it.
I Found it. It's right after definitions.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, regarding general finished definitions. Note specimen. This is kind of, okay, it goes over on the last page. It goes to page 2. And I'm just gonna kind of jump ahead to page 2 because that's where I kind of did a summation. It's just, did you find the document? Sweet one? Yes, 28, if you turn the page over. Then the last, I comment, what I did is that I recommend that we retain, I like the strategy adopted by the Planning Commission where they eliminated this section, and what they did was move that data into a definition section. It just made more sense to me.
The whole provision?
I think so. And again, I have to reference the code to see, but I think they eliminated this.
So
What this is
you're getting rid of
called.
historic, right?
Yeah, and you'll kind of see my comments about that.
And you're,
Initially, yeah, what I kind of said was that, definitions. There were some changes that they made that we might want to look at in terms of language, in terms of where they did their definitions. They also changed the definition of a shade, they created shade tree, I believe, and called it at a height of 30 feet or more of maturity. So I'm back on page 1 of mine.
All right, so basically what you're saying though is
Yeah.
eliminate
Eliminate this as
through
a,
25328,
as it is.
put the text
Put
of
that-
a
move that
a
in-
revised text into the
into a
definition section.
Definition section as they did. And those are noted as protected tree, shade tree, and specimen tree.
Okay.
And then a tree stand, they put in tree stand. Now, I made a note about tree stand, and what I think looking, Liz, at some of your notes,
Mine?
Not yours, city, Liz's city arborist notes. What I saw was you kind of dropping this. And
Tree stand.
Tree stand, and I made a guess, because there aren't any,
No.
or because it doesn't merit a separate
There's-
designation.
There's no extra protection or anything
Yeah.
afforded to a tree stand.
Yeah,
So is a group of like a bunch of 3-inch seedlings something that deserves protection?
yeah, I mean, it
Think
just
so.
yeah, and that's the other guess, or because descriptions of protected trees, cover trees described above as those in tree
Exactly.
stands, so it's kind of redundant. And I would also say that given the character of our town, I mean, currently, there's nothing that constitutes a valuable tree stand.
There's a
on-
few wooded lots, but
Oh, okay, there are a few, but
but
this is-
it's not afforded any extra protection or nothing is
Protection.
different in
Nothing's
there.
different in terms of how the code's applied to
Right.
protect
just
them.
a-
Individual tree versus a tree stand.
Yes, yeah,
It's just a waste of
so it's
Right.
kind of, yeah, so.
3 lines.
Yeah, so what I might do then is get rid of tree stand in the definitions.
Yeah.
Just sort of strike that, because I think what Liz says
All right,
makes
well,
sense.
let's just stop. For purposes of 25328, what you're saying is we're gonna shift whatever that winds up being
Right.
into the
Into
definitions.
definitions.
And I'm good with that. Okay, now,
There's-
if we wanna look at,
Go ahead.
if we wanna look at the individual provision, what am I trying to say, the text itself that we're moving over to 24, and I forget, I guess it was Sandy very early on this morning, says a lot of this stuff interrelates, meshes together, so you see it in one provision, you see it in another. And so I've got in my suggestion, actually, it's more of Liz's.
You
Okay.
can take credit for it.
25330 from tree removal.
Okay.
She really pared that down, and I further refined it, changed it to identify different types of trees, which kind of then spills into what you're talking about.
Got it.
So if I may, let me just tell you what, and this, I'm literally taking this out of 25330, which is, I think it's in your packet too, somewhere. I'm in 25330C. No, I'm not. Where am I?
I don't know, I'm back at the beginning right
No,
now.
I'm sorry, I got the wrong thing. Is it 234, where the hell am I? No.
It is 30.
No. I retract all of that. It's not in there. It's not in there. Let me
What's
just,
this?
I'm gonna wing it.
Hold on, what's that one?
That is it, but it's not. What we're talking about, we identified, you and I had a meeting, and we identified 3 different types of trees. And yours were, I think this might be the definition of a protected tree, which I did as a separate paper on, which I, of course, didn't bring with me today. Who would think we could get this far? But anyway, a tree between something less than like 6 inches to 12 inches.
Have in here. Yeah.
Is it in there?
Yeah,
Where is it?
the part I just showed you, proposed amendment to city code 5330 tree removal permits.
But, see, is it in here? But anyway, so 6 to 12 inches is whatever we're describing it as. 12 to like 24 inches is a protected tree, and anything above 24 is a specimen tree.
Heritage.
And anything above
that's
that is
not
a
in there.
heritage tree.
Yeah, we came up with, different categories, yeah.
And your dimensions might have been different than mine, and I'm totally flexible
That's how
on,
I am with it.
uh,
A few inches either way doesn't really matter on that one. But basically affording the really large trees better protection.
right.
And it also equated to our replacement too. So depending on how large the tree was or how many replacement trees were required.
Well, okay, and then now we're getting over to mitigation. I'm not going there today. But anyway, do you
Yeah.
have some?
So yeah, if you notice here in protected trees, and this was the version in the 2016 revision, a specimen tree or tree stand, again, you take tree stand out, a tree necessary to meet and counted to meet density requirements necessary in existing tree of 6 inches DBH. The 214 draft prior to that had 4 inches instead of 6, okay, so smaller.
Yeah, I think that's too small.
We know
Gotcha.
we know this is literally like 4 inches
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
The size of this coffee
That's-
cup. I mean, 4 inches is pretty much if you fit your hands around it.
Got
It's
it.
pretty small.
Gotcha.
I-
So what do you think? Do you,
6.
Do you like 6?
Yeah.
I like 6. I think that's a
Okay.
I mean, 4 inches, you could just chop it down and I didn't
Right.
realize it is a tree, to be honest.
Got it. So your thought is to have,
If somebody felt really strongly about 4 or 5 or 7.
And the question is, how far do we want to go with this? Do we want to go up 36 inches or, what?
What do you mean up?
Well, 6 to 12, 12 to 24. Do we need to go past 24? Do we need to go 24 to 36?
You just say 24 and above. It's the last category.
Okay.
got it.
Okay, may I be excused?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, you guys are doing an awesome job, and I wasn't privy to all this before, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you for staying this long.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, I apologize. I just,
Gotta go to work.
I got a little bit going on right now.
I want to send you a text and then I'll call you.
Perfect,
Okay.
yep. And
All right.
again, I will be much more available
All right.
as soon as I get my last 30
Yeah,
days
thank you.
here.
Thank you.
Wait till
Was-
Dean gets back.
Absolutely. Oh, so we have a quorum? Yes, ma'am.
Ah,
Yes,
Oh.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you,
Yes,
Ann.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Yep,
I,
yeah.
I kept
Okay,
bumping
so-
into Liz, because I've got Liz's notes, and one of the things I did was sort of note Liz's notes while I went through here. It was kind of like 2006, 14,
You guys have come a
16.
long way. I mean,
Liz
from what
notes
you're,
and-
we're-
We did very good today too, I
But
think.
Liz changes her mind from notes to notes.
Oh,
So-
please.
Yeah, so.
I
so
do.
that-
Well,
so-
3.5 years in, I should be changing my
Yes,
mind.
you were, so I was kind of like, and none of them are dated, which is like a little pet peeve of mine. They are, the author's name is on them, which is good. So I love to see an author name and a date on anything that we see. But anyway, however, one of the things you said, a protected tree at one point in your notes, you said an existing tree of 2 inches caliper or more, which is necessary to meet density requirements in 253-26, or 2, an existing tree, alive or dead, of 6 inches DBH or more. And what do you think about having somewhere in here as a protected tree, an existing tree, alive or dead?
I changed it because I
Okay.
think I've had people bring it up to me, is it actually a tree if it's dead? When my held to all this, is it really?
Doesn't the current code say, though, you have to replace trees that die?
Yeah, but like, if you really wanted to argue it, I think you could make a
If you were over
argument
the minimum density.
that, I think you could make the argument.
I'm at, I want to know for the record that
Tree.
Susan Wood's going to be leaving.
Thank
you guys very
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the way the code will come out this time, it won't be necessary, but I at least put it in there so that I would remember to think about it too,
Okay.
more than
Okay.
anything.
So we will be dealing with definitions, 25324. We're going to deal with that probably as a separate meeting. And so what I'm suggesting is, you're welcome to make comments about what?
Us, all of us. Oh, she's just saying, why are you looking at me?
You're welcome to, she wants to go to lunch. You're welcome to offer your thoughts about what I'm suggesting here as it
Okay.
relates to this thing.
Yeah,
But we
I have
will
to
go
put
back
in
to
my
that
head.
issue
Okay,
when we come to our meeting about definitions.
got it. 6 inches, 12 and 24 plus. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason we did 6 to 12 was because At that one, if it's less than 12 inches, you kind of get a free, as long as you put a tree back. That was the original intent.
Right.
You didn't need to meet any
Right.
condition. That's just, hey, this tree grew and I changed my mind and it's only 8 inches and I'm just going to swap it out for one that's 2 or 3. No real net loss. You can change your mind. It gives flexibility without really harming the canopy.
And where did you plug in with Hoyte that section? I mean, I've run into that, but I'm not sure where.
What are you saying?
Where else? That the 6-inch, 12-inch, and 24, is that in mitigation?
I think it
Is
is.
that in the mitigation?
Well, we did the protected and the heritage, so it
Yeah.
tied into that.
Okay,
Then
right,
it tied
right,
into the
right.
replacement, required replacements. A protected tree equals 2 replacement, whatever
Got
it
Right,
was.
yeah. And we've got to deal with that yet too.
Okay. Okay.
And then I also did a couple of things that, I didn't finish them out, but the whole point of having a heritage tree designation is to afford it extra protection. So that 25-inch and plus, what are we gonna do specifically to preserve and protect them?
Is that another question you have? Of
It's something that
that's not-
code needs to address, and I've
Okay.
seen some tree codes that require like arborist reports, where they require you to hire a contractor,
Uh-huh.
and they have to put
Submit
together a
a
report and a
report.
plan on how these trees,
For your approval?
yes, for the city's approval, how these trees are gonna be preserved during construction, what are you gonna do to ensure that these trees live?
Yeah, we've already talked about that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah,
Construction.
Because
okay.
otherwise, there's no
Yeah.
point in making that designation.
Right, right. I thought you-
Right, protections with a certified arborist plan. Okay, arb plan, I got it. So you're kind of, you got rid of historic trees because it's just not something we do,
Well,
have
the
never
connotation,
done. And,
Yeah,
So this is
without
more
regard
about-
for whether it's 24, 36 or whatever,
Okay.
I think that heritage was the more appropriate term.
I mean, it's more in line with how we're operating.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's semantics with that, but I think it works better than historic.
Got it.
Anything else?
Let me see, the shade tree, and again, the shade tree, the 2000, I think, 14 and 16 said it was capable of attaining a height of 30 feet or more of maturity. Again,
Now, was
This
that
is
part
in-
of,
this is in 253-28.
it's still in 28, okay.
So, and this is again where things were moved to definitions, but an addition to the definitions was this shade tree. And one of the things that I noted that Liz suggested that a shade tree be, or a canopy tree, because you use both of those, be a medium or large size tree that is grown for its canopy. This was one of your definitions. The tree must be able to attain a minimum height of 45 feet and a spread of 20 feet. And so to me, this gets more in the line of what we're talking about when we talk about a tree that could be a high canopy tree.
Okay.
What do you think?
The 30 feet, like the way our tree list is now, there's a lot of trees that go in the 20 to 30 foot range.
Right, okay.
Those are considered a small specimen, like a hornbeam, for
Okay.
example,
Okay.
or a dogwood.
Is that identified in your tree list at this point?
My existing tree list, yeah, it's broken down as the code requires the evergreen small specimen.
But I mean, as a specific height or height range, whatever.
Yeah, anything under 30 or under. So 30 is not a great number because a lot of trees a lot of those small, dogwood can get 30. So you have to pop it up just a little bit, whether it's 40 or 45 or something like that.
Right.
And we definitely need a width because of the trend to go towards more columnar.
You mean a canopy width?
Yes,
Okay.
have a tree that does this
No, I
instead of,
understand.
yeah.
That's the trend, is that people are going, okay, well, it's a pin oak, but it's a green pillar pin oak, which means it only gets 12 feet wide.
Oh.
And they have their uses for sure,
Right.
but they're not really meeting. When you say plant a large, like when we're requiring them to plant a medium or large tree, I don't think that was the intent. I don't even know if a green pillar oak existed 10 years ago. Because I heard somebody use the phrase nativar, a native cultivar. So it's native, but it's not really found grown in the wild,
Right.
but it's
kind of
native.
a hybrid, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
nativar.
Designer tree.
Well, and that's how they come up with the best
Oh, I know,
trees too.
yeah.
You know, ones that are immune or
right,
more
right.
resistant to certain diseases
Or
and insects.
fit in specific.
Right.
Spaces, exactly.
Spaces.
So again,
Yeah.
I'll put my 2 cents worth in. I'm going to call it an evolving opinion of the term shade,
Got it.
shade tree.
Got it.
But as I've been looking at other codes, I'm seeing that pretty frequently.
Right.
So I'm softening my thought about it.
Got it.
But again, I believe this is a more appropriate discussion to be had when we get down to the specifics of definitions,
Got it.
okay?
On the actual height and size.
And
yeah.
all that stuff, right,
Yeah.
But I
exactly.
think you need to decide, like, if we're gonna have a minimum density, if we're only focusing on bigger trees.
Right,
Yep.
right. Okay, so, thank you very much.
You're
I
welcome.
may
All done?
want to get with you on some other issues, for example, protected tree stuff. And I'll get in touch with you at your convenience,
Okay.
mutual convenience. And so I'm about ready to shut this thing down. I have,
Could I make a request, just since we've discussed the one that I did, I just would want to invite anybody on the committee to send me comments.
that's what we do.
Thank you.
In fact, we
Thank you.
just formalized the way we're gonna do it.
Okay,
To
thank you.
take that burden off of me, so I'm all in favor of that. Okay, so anyway,
Thank you.
for our next meeting, which is scheduled now for July 3rd, our start time, as is the custom, is 10 o'clock. I'm wondering if we can move that up to 9 o'clock again, if that's amenable. Gene, are you okay with that, 9 o'clock?
I got a house full of people coming for fireworks day, so.
Okay. Does that mean you will not be attending?
No, I can do it at 9.
Okay. All right, 10 o'clock.
It'd be nice if it didn't go to
Okay,
12.
10 o'clock. Move it to 12?
I said, it'd be nice if it didn't go to 12.
Are you trying to say this
Oh.
isn't fun?
Yeah,
Come on.
yeah. Well, okay, and so frankly, then what I would intend to do, just to kind of scope it out a little bit, is to bring up some of these other issues besides the tree ordinance. And we can limit the amount of time that we spend and don't, you won't have to be there and,
Okay, maybe just say 9 to 11, cut it short, and
or
everybody can
10,
have.
10 to 11:30 or something like that. How's that
9
sound?
o'clock is fine.
Oh, 9 o'clock is okay? Oh, okay.
I just-
You didn't want to stay till noon.
Oh, okay, okay. All right. Yeah, it'll be a shorter meeting. Hopefully. Okay. All right, so where are we? 11:53. We will adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody that came in the audience today. Thank you very much.
Everybody watching?